Fabian is right.
In progress.
Hey, welcome everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the January 23rd meeting of the Operations Work Group. The first agenda item is public input. There were no written statements for this meeting, and we do not have any public appearances. So we will move on to the approval of the minutes. I move to approve the minutes from the Operations Work Group meeting dated November 11th, 2022.
Second, Nikki Vandermeer.
Okay, thank
Wait,
you.
Point of clarification, is it November 14th?
Oh, I'm sorry. Was it the 14th? One sec. That is correct. I will do that motion over again. I move to approve the minutes of the Operations Work Group meeting dated November 14th, 2022. Can I have a second?
Second, Nikki Vandermeer.
Thank you. Joanna, you are on the meeting.
Yes, I do.
Have your advisory vote, please.
Yes, I do.
All right, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. All right. Quickly here into our agenda for this evening. The first item on our agenda is the 2023-24 budget development process. Today we begin our planning and discussions for the 2023-24 budget. With our fiscal year starting on July 1st and ending on June 30th. This is the first step in a months-long process that will take us to a draft preliminary budget in April, a vote on a preliminary budget at the end of June, and a final budget approval in October. Today, Ross McPherson, our Assistant Superintendent of Financial Services, is here to outline our budget guiding principles and goals and give us the revenue forecast with what information we have thus far. Having just returned from the State Education Convention in Milwaukee last week, there was a lot of focus there on the uncertainty of this budget cycle and funding for pre-K to 12 schools. As we know, the state of Wisconsin works on a biennial budget cycle, approving their budgets for 2 years, and we're at the start of the 2023-25 budget cycle, and it will be a while before we know exactly how the state will invest and adjust school funding for the next 2 years. And so Ross will explain our process here more in detail as we move through the budget cycle. We will consider our guiding principles and goals, and then make sure we are clear on how various revenue scenarios may affect our budget outlook. As a reminder, we will not be talking about staffing levels or base wage at this meeting. We'll go into closed session after this meeting tonight to discuss base wage negotiations. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ross.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Board Member Schmidt. As she mentioned, we are here tonight to discuss what we know today around the biennial process in the state budget for the 23-25 school year and where we find ourselves in our initial planning for the 23-24. As always, we begin our discussions about the work group and all of our meetings discussing our 3 goals. Goal 1, that every child is on track to graduate ready for college, career, and community. Goal 2, district and every school in it is a place where children, staff thrive. And goal 3, African-American children and youth excel in school. As a reminder to this group and the public, our budget planning approach typically follows the following sequence. At this time of year, we're establishing our initial goals and guiding principles with the administrative team and the Board of Education. We're in the process of creating our revenue forecast, assumptions, and what we know about our projected enrollment at this point. This helps us develop our initial baseline staffing plan and develop the plan as needed. As we move into later months this spring, we'll determine our final compensation strategy and our district priority actions. And we'll finalize some of our finer points in the discussions going into the Tuesday and finalizing the healthcare and medical recommendations. Our objective tonight is to review the high-level information we have today on 23-24 budgetary planning, including our goals and guiding principles. We're going to be reviewing the budget outlook and enrollment trends for our district over the last several years, and our revenue projections and scenarios we have to share. The planning we do over the next several months, steps will be outlined based on this discussion and further discussions with the board and administrative team. Our timeline, we are in January. This is our budget kickoff month. Again, go over our budgetary overview information and revenue projections and strategy. The rest of the months on this calendar identify some of the major touch points. In February, we're going to be doing more discussions around compensation, staffing projections and workbooks, and our summer semester. In March, we'll review any pertinent information related to healthcare and benefits overview and direction, and review any excellence and equity project decisions and strategic focus areas. In April, we'll put our first draft of the preliminary budget book together. At the regular board meeting in April, we'll present that preliminary budget to the board and the public, and this will kick off the initial feedback phase of the draft budget, which will continue through the May and June timeframe. We'll make final changes, identify any more ongoing one-time investments from the state and federal government, and approve our final preliminary budget to begin on July 1st. Our guiding principles for 23-24 are very similar to years past. We are going to allocate our resources in line with district core values, aimed at the greatest impact on district strategic framework goals, with a primary focus on early literacy and beyond. Maintain a multi-year, long-range perspective on revenue sources and strategic investments, including accelerated academic outcomes, and ongoing COVID-19 safety measures. Maximize operational efficiencies and use of taxpayer-approved revenue authority to ensure stability in schools in a time of great uncertainty, and build on practices that are showing data supporting promises for the future. Our budgetary goals then are in line with board-approved policies. We will present an equitable use and distribution of resources to support students with the highest needs. Reduce the number of sections below minimum board class size policy, allowing for more targeted resource allocation. Utilize the board's educational equity tool for decision-making outside of already approved board policies. Invest in a focused set of priorities aimed at multi-year investments to meet persistent equity needs with primary focuses on early literacy. And provide total compensation to employees using state budget information to guide budget development. I want to begin the next couple of slides by highlighting some of the information we know today. The state biennial budget process, of course, the state biennial budget does not begin until July 1st of 2023. But as of today, we only know what the request is by the state agency, in this case, the DPI. The funding highlights from this request are on the slide here. I want to go through these in pretty good detail. The revenue limit itself is our primary source of generating revenue between local tax levy and general state aids. Within the revenue limit, the state budget gives us the authority to increase or adjust our revenue authority based on a change in the per pupil revenue limit figure. This figure is a multiplier that is taken against a 3-year average of our enrollment. The request from the DPI are as follows: a per pupil adjustment of $350 per pupil in the 23-24 school year, fiscal 24, and $650 per pupil in the 24-25 school year, or fiscal year 25. Some additional requests. There is a request to count 4K students as full day students in membership calculations if they are currently enrolled in a program. For years, the 4K students are only allowed to be counted at 60% of a full FTE, regardless of what program they are in. There's an additional request from the DPI of approximately $300 million in general aids in the 23-24 school year and $630 million in the 24-25 school year. I want to highlight here that increases and request increases to general aid do not represent more funding to our school district. It changes the amount of money we receive in general aids versus what we're able to raise in tax levy. Beyond revenue limit impacts, there is a request to change per pupil categorical aid, which is an aid program, again, outside the revenue limit, established following Act 10, of an increase of $24 per pupil in fiscal 24, and $45 in fiscal 25. Since this program was created, it is essentially a second multiplier outside the revenue limit for categorical aid purposes. The difference being is this type of funding has no guarantees under state formulas or state statutes on how it is given to school districts. Two other requests that have come up in recent budget cycles. One is an increase to special education categorical aid reimbursement to 45% in the 23-24 school year and 60% in the 24-25 school year. For reference, the special education categorical aid reimbursement figure has been roughly 30% for over a decade. For the first time, though, it is nice to see there's an increased request for bilingual bicultural aid. For years, this reimbursement rate has been at roughly 8%. And there is a request in the 23-24 school year to increase that reimbursement to 15% that year and 20% in the 24-25 school year. Again, everything I just rattled off here based on the DPI budget request from the end of last year. The way the biennial budget process will continue from this point is dependent on the governor's response to departmental requests, including the Department of Instruction. And we're not expected to hear from the governor until after that. After that point, the Joint Finance Committee must pick up these requests for all state agencies and provide a recommendation and put forward a budget that the governor would decide on or before July 1st. As an additional review, I want to go a little bit more through what the impacts to the revenue limit are from this request, namely the 350, 650 increase to the per pupil multiplier, and that for historical purposes, changes to the revenue limit has been below $200 per pupil since the 10-11 school year, which of course was the year Act 10 was implemented. Since revenue limits were created in 1993, the revenue increase has never been above $300 ever.
Highest was 244, right?
Right, that's correct. We also have significant authority given to us by the referendum that this district passed in 2020. This additional authority would the revenue limit each year. And for this upcoming year, we're scheduled to add $10 million of authority in the final year. It is important to note, and we'll go through this more in the next couple of slides, that the authority given to us from this referendum is net against adjustments from declining enrollment and hold harmless exemptions, which you've heard me talk about now for the last 18 months. And finally, the impacts to the state per pupil categorical aid. Again, this is a program enacted since Act 10, authorizes $1 per member change. The proposed next year or the next cycle is $24 increases in year one and $45 increases in year two. The per pupil categorical aid is a relatively volatile program in state funding, as I mentioned before, and is not guaranteed under state funding formulas. This is something I want to highlight only because if there were ever to be an adjustment to this appropriation at the state level, we would have no recourse on how to recover any funding we would lose if that were to happen. And finally, that program has been frozen at a figure of $742 per pupil since the initiation. I also want to take another second to go through non-recurring exemptions. Again, you've heard from me a lot on this topic over the last year. Non-recurring exemptions are given to school districts under the revenue limit on a one-year basis to account for either one-off expenditures or situations that result in a guaranteed one-time use of authority beyond initial calculations. So for reference, since the 14-15 school year, the total of our non-recurring exemptions has increased from roughly $400,000 to a peak of $15.1 million in the 21-22 school year. Again, some of these exemptions are tied to specific expenditures. For example, private school vouchers are a significant source of non-recurring exemptions in our revenue limit. And each year that those increase, we require those providers comes on as a one-time authority in a revenue limit. For those situations to disappear, those expenditures would disappear at the same time. However, there are other types of non-recurring exemptions, namely declining enrollment and hold harmless exemptions that have very volatile impacts on the revenue limit itself. Specifically, hold harmless exemptions are generated in the revenue limit whenever the calculation of the revenue limit itself, which again is our enrollment times our multiplier under the formula, results in a calculation less than the prior year. When that occurs, the state formula gives us a one-year safety net to accommodate what was either an unforeseen impact or a significant impact under state statutory limitations. As our enrollment begins to stabilize following the reductions we've seen due to COVID, these exemptions are starting to disappear. And because of that, the increases we would normally see in a typical budget cycle are eroding our base revenue limit authority. Declining enrollment exemptions specifically are designed to give districts time to adapt to those situations. This is one of the core reasons why whenever we talk about shifts in enrollment, we always talk about changes in the 3-year average itself, not a 1-year change. If our revenue limit itself were ever based on a 1-year change in enrollment, we would have seen a significantly different impact in the 2021 school year following the first year of COVID. Our use of exemptions, specifically non-recurring exemptions over the last several years, has been a highlight of budgetary discussions internally and externally with the board and the public. The cumulative effect of these one-time exemptions would have created a reduction in our revenue limit for the 23-24 school year without the referendum authority we've been discussing. And we'll talk about that in more detail in later slides.
Can I ask a question? Sure. Yeah, quick.
Do you think Ross can get through the presentation?
I just didn't want to forget it.
Okay, I will remind you it's on
Thank you.
slide. The revenue forecast slide.
Revenue forecast, got it. I just didn't want to forget it.
So some additional context, because I typically am a visual learner, I like to provide some information on how these trends have panned out over the last several years. This is a simple line chart indicating the change in the revenue limit multiplier itself since the beginning of COVID. Probably noticed that since revenue limits were enacted in 1993, change in the revenue limit authority itself has been relatively stable right up until the 10-11 school year. Following that year, we had a significant sharp decline in our per pupil multiplier, and the revenue authority that year caused a significant decline in all school districts across Wisconsin. Since that point, it's not hard to see that the changes in our regular authority have been very inconsistent and volatile. And those final 2 years on this chart, marked in orange, indicate the current DPI budgetary request under the revenue limit itself. It is certainly the largest single increase that has been requested by the DPI in the budgetary revenue limit programs. But as you'll see in the following slides, it's not clear what this impact is going to do for us. And specifically, it's unclear if this is going to remain in the state budget based on past experience. We know for the last 6 budgetary cycles, at least, that the DPI budgetary request that comes out prior to this point typically represents the ceiling of what we're given to expect on what will survive between the governor's recommendations and the Joint Finance Committee recommendations before the budget's approved. Here's a view of what is happening to our enrollment. Between the 17-18 and the 19-20 school year, our enrollment was relatively stable. And since the 19-20 school year, of course, we've had the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And there is a marked decrease in our 3-year rolling average, not only in our district, but in our surrounding school districts as well. This is going to become important because when we talk about how the revenue limit itself is calculated, if the increase in the per pupil adjustment is increasing slower than our enrollment is decreasing, we're going to continue to create a base revenue limit amount lower than the previous year, hence the discussions around hold harmless. Another way to look at this is what's happening to our total revenue limit authority over the last several years. Since the 18-19 school year, there's been a significant increase in our level of non-recurring exemptions. If you're looking at these bar charts, that is the amount at the top slice of each item on this bar chart. It is becoming an increasingly larger portion of our overall revenue limit. Final 2 areas that are shaded and highlighted for you on the screen show the potential impacts of what could happen to our revenue limit if we receive what the DPI budgetary request is on the far right, or if we receive a similar situation to what we saw in the 21-23 biennial budget process, where we received no increase per pupil on the revenue limit. Another view of that, same information. The line in orange carried all the way through represents the historical impact of our revenue limit itself. And finally, the impact of the DPI budgetary request at the final point. The line in blue that deviates from that final point there shows what would happen if we received status quo. The reason I included 2 views of this chart is to show how quickly that line of authority is flattening over the last several years. And finally, some hard numbers for us to consider. What our revenue limit ultimately becomes over the next year and the next 2 years is going to rely heavily on what our enrollment does and the specific state investment in K-12 education. Our budgetary growth will continue to be minimal after repeated hold harmless and declining enrollment exemptions. I'll walk you through that in a minute. And if our enrollment does begin to stabilize, which it has not yet, revenue limit increases we're likely to receive in the next several years will come from whatever per pupil adjustments we get under state formulas and possible future operating referendum. Where we are going into our final year, 4-year referendum cycle. In the 24-25 school year, we will have no referendum currently approved. The chart on this page has a lot of information. I want to walk through some of the finer points more slowly. What you're looking at here is a compressed version of the revenue limit calculation itself. On the left of this chart, you'll see descriptors for certain factors of the revenue limit, as well as historical information for the past 5 budgetary years. We, of course, are in the 22-23 school year right now. So if you look at the 5th column on this chart, you'll see that our 3-year rolling average for this school year was 26,349 pupils. This generates, after using our Addison multiplier, a base revenue limit of $351,986,542. The line below that, though, is where I want to draw the most attention. When I keep talking about hold harmless, I need to make it understood how this exemption itself has continued to erode our base revenue limit. In the 21-22 and 22-23 school years, we generated over $5 million of hold harmless exemptions. When these amounts are generated under state formulas, they are treated as a non-recurring exemption. This means that when I start the next school year's budget development, I know that that amount, in addition to all other non-recurring exemptions, will be subtracted before I begin calculations at all. Moving forward to the bottom of this chart, just to show the overall impact, there's a line labeled revenue limit with all exemptions. Since the 18-19 school year, we've seen rather significant and reliable increases in the revenue limit formula itself up until the 22-23 school year. Between 18-19 and 19-20, the authority increased roughly $13 million. 19-20 to 2021 increased roughly $12 million, et cetera. But I do want to highlight that these 1-year changes or 1-year impacts of hold harmless exemptions can be viewed on this chart. The 22-23 revenue limit with all exemptions, just shy of $375.6 million. The reason I highlight that is if you look at the year before, our total revenue limit authority only went up about $3.4 million. That's a significant deviation than what we've seen in previous years. Moving to the far right of the chart, there are 2 years highlighted in gray. This is again to show the same 2 scenarios I had on the bar charts a minute ago. If we were to receive the DPI budgetary request of $350 per pupil at the far right, our revenue limit authority may only go up about $8 million. If we receive another status quo budget from the state, our revenue limit may go up just over $2 million. These are the types of variances we have to consider right now during our initial budgetary development. I also want to highlight another factor. The increase requested by the DPI of $350 and $650 per pupil is the largest requested increase to the revenue limit in recent history. However, over the last 2 years, we received a budgetary investment from the state of $0 per pupil. Those impacts we've gone through in many ways right in the past 10 minutes. I highlight that because if we were not to have the referendum we have right now, I want to draw everyone's attention to the bottom of this chart where there are percentage changes in the revenue limit itself. Between the 22-23 and 23-24 school year, with our referendums intact, if we receive a $0 per pupil adjustment, our revenue limit will only go up about 0.57%. If we receive the budgetary request from the DPI of $350, it could be closer to 2.22%. Without the referendum, under both conditions, our revenue will be going down next year, even with that request. The next steps in our budgetary planning involve analysis of what we know. It is the largest increase the DPI has ever requested in the revenue limit. However, even if everything in the DPI budgetary proposal passes this spring, it's not anywhere close to addressing our declining enrollment situation or inflation we've all been experiencing over the last year. Because of this, I need to highlight that the revenue streams for school districts continue to be strained, and they're going to continue to stagnate under state investment. It could be said that because of the last biennium and the inflation over the last year, a lot of the damage to school funding formulas has already been done. So our work over the next several months is going to require significant realignment work and proposals from the administration to bring to you guys for further discussion. But the sad part about this is that over the last 6 budgetary cycles, what I've witnessed is it is very unlikely we're going to have actionable information to work with until very late this spring or even this summer. Some of you remember that we didn't get approval of the state budget for 21-23 until after July 1st. So for our next steps, in February, we're going to be coming back to the board to confirm budgetary strategy, any changes to the goals and principles that we need to address in this cycle. Review our staffing strategies and timelines. In March, we'll come back again to talk about compensation strategy, healthcare plans, any reviews of excellence and equity projects we need to consider for either approval in the April preliminary budget or potential early approvals for July 1st. April will be the first preliminary budget information before the board. And with that, I'll open it back up to the chair for discussion.
All right. Yep, I see you, Nikki. So that was a lot of information, all in one spot there. I guess we have both the guiding principles and goals of this budget, as well as the revenue forecast to discuss. Dr. Jenkins, I'm wondering if you have anything that you want to say before we do open it up to the board for questions.
Well, first of all, excellent job by Ross summarizing this. This is information we've been talking about, and I just cannot say enough that we appreciate the DPI's recommendation being the highest ever, given the fact that we've had a decline in enrollment, given the fact of where we are now with the 0-0. Before we even start to go through the process, we're in a challenging situation. But I want to highlight something Ross said in terms of when the budget is actually approved for us, and then coming forth now with an actual budget for us, we're giving our best guesstimate of what could be. And I know we've been in a similar situation before. This year is really critical as we continue to see CPI. We see other things too that's also adding to this challenge in which we have for us. And it's a serious investment of making it staff right now. This budgetary situation is a really challenging one. It really is. Just want to put that out there.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Had a specific question on the revenue forecast side. Did you
Well,
want to start there, or did you
yeah.
have? Okay.
My specific question is, I know that there are things that are built into the budget in case of emergency situations or unexpected changes. If we were to take in 100 or even less students from another district, and how does that work? Do we get an exemption that way or not?
It would depend when the students appear. So we do make plans in terms of our staffing process to account for unforeseen shifts in section size and enrollment at specific buildings. If students were to appear prior to the count date, they'd be part of our revenue limit calculations, which would be incorporated in fall approval.
I think, with the 51 that I'm discussing, would they count them in our enrollment?
For next year?
Yeah.
Not yet, no, because they're not currently enrolled in our district.
Any other questions?
No.
Laura, and then Nisha.
So Ross, first, thank you for such great graphs and charts. Beautiful. We're not the only district that's in this situation. Do you have any insight as to how other districts are planning to handle this?
Not easily, the short answer. I've been in discussions with a lot of practitioners across the state. And over the last several years, many districts have used one-time sources of funding to continue operations. with the expectation the state's gonna have to backfill, for lack of a better term, the investments we've been required to make on a one-time basis. Madison has been able to get in front of a lot of that planning in the last couple of years. We're now at a point where we need to start considering those same strategies. For the future, though, what I mentioned earlier is still very important to remember. A lot of the damage that was done by the most recent budgetary cycle is not going to be undone unless there's more investment from the state to make up for the last 2 years. That's not currently on the table from what I'm seeing. Other districts, though, have already started previewing publicly what budgetary gaps they're seeing for 24-25 and how they would address that at that point. A lot of people are concerned, I'll put it that way.
As we have been talking about increasing wages in various categories of staff, have you heard of other districts that are looking at their wage categories? Look for it.
In relation to our own actions, not specifically, but I will tell you that we are not the only district to be looking at compensation as a whole. What makes the most sense for the market and marketability of the profession itself. As you know, we've talked to the board several times about doing a compensation study. We are still in the process of selecting a vendor. But once we do, we'll start to bring preliminary information. The discussions we've had externally have involved a lot of struggling for the correct term, but what is appropriate for the profession in certain areas. And what we're finding is there's a very real lack of consistency depending on where you are in the country or within specific states.
Chairman, may I ask a clarifying question of what he means by appropriate?
Yeah, go ahead.
What do you mean? I'm sorry, I'm confused on what is appropriate for the profession. I lost you at that point.
I wasn't meaning anything specific by it. It was just a relative inconsistency over what we're seeing in other areas.
Okay. I just didn't want to miss
That's
anything.
fine. That's
All right, Board Member Nichols.
Thank you. Thank you, Ross, for the detailed and depressing news.
I try to uplift.
I know. So here's a couple of things. I would like to go back to these, like, guiding principles. Because to me, guiding principles are the thing that you come back to when you have to make tough decisions. They're kind of like your guardrails. So what I see here is that we still want to allocate resources in line with our strategic framework goals with a primary focus on early literacy and beyond. And I think what that brings up for me is a question about many of the other things that have now been funded through ESSER and what will become unfunded in the near future. So as we are in the budget development process, will you be bringing us an update on kind of a reminder of all of the ESSER funded projects and which ones would be kind of closing out?
Yes, in fact, we have been working on that exact idea. We are going to be reporting out on what spending on ESSER has occurred to this point, especially those projects that are just now starting in second semester. I do want to highlight, though, that even if we're talking about the priorities as our major focuses being early literacy and beyond, it's not that ESSER funds all of those priorities. Is we made a conscious effort to use ESSER to push us further, knowing we had no new recurring resources to invest in the current budgetary cycle.
Yeah.
But to your point, we are working on an ESSER report out. We're still determining what that looks like so that we can give it to the board.
Yeah, and I thank you for that. I wasn't stating it as though I know all other things are funded by ESSER. It was more, it just brought that up because when we say that we're going to prioritize early literacy and beyond, we've done some other significant investments, and we have others coming in front of us that aren't necessarily early literacy. So I just, for me, I think as a board member, yeah, it'd be important for us to, to consider the asks that are coming in front of us at this point, if they're not specifically aligned to early literacy and beyond, or I would appreciate kind of what's the definition and the scope of what fits under early literacy and beyond, if we're gonna have to make some tough decisions. The second guiding principle around maintaining a multi-year long-range perspective, that's kind of what you just did tonight, right? So it's kind of looking backwards and forwards, really getting a grip around our enrollment, our hold harmless, our other our recurring exemptions, non-recurring exemptions, and just understanding like where we are, right? Okay. Then the third guiding principle around maximizing operational efficiencies to ensure stability in schools. Can you give me an example of what that would look like in our budget development? Like the operational efficiency part, as well as the stability in our schools.
I think it ties in part back to the goals as well, because I will say, first of all, this particular bullet item was crafted more in the lens of during COVID as to what we were doing. And I attempted to soften it to be not COVID specific anymore. So I'm happy to workshop the words there if we need to get a little closer.
Okay.
But in terms of maximizing efficiencies, we're looking at things like the class size policy. We're looking at areas of the organization that either have positions we're unable to fill, or things we need to identify where we could be more efficient in, or changing levels of services. Those are the non-specific examples of things we're already doing to help the budget at least stay on the trajectory we think we can maintain.
Okay. Because it seems as though whether it's been through our referendum projects, and some of the other things that I think the board approves through the consent agenda each month, what it appears is the cost of doing business as a school district has gone up. And so I don't have a solution tonight, but the operational efficiency part seems almost counterintuitive when we are having to spend more just to do kind of the standard operations to run a district. Yeah, so I'll continue to try to think about what that would look like, operational efficiency. And then the last bullet where the guiding principle is build on practices that are showing data supported promises for the future. What does that mean in layman's terms? What is that?
Yeah, I think, the thing that we may begin to do with our promise and practice, and when we first started in the pandemic, we looked at our promise school, right? We looked at that as just something during that time to give an alternative learning for those who need it. But now we're looking at continue to push in on that as an innovative thought in terms of meeting the needs of some of our students. That's just like an example off the top. The things that we were invested in during the pandemic, we're going to look to continue to invest in it, but we're going to do it in an efficient manner to be able to meet the needs of our students and to bring something else to the table. That's one of the things that I would think of just as an example. There's several, but that's just one that I see around.
Okay. Well,
Can I also go back to something that Ross was trying to say to you too, when we talk about our costs increasing? We mentioned about the sustainability. That cost has gone up.
yeah,
We know that we have to make these decisions. This is why we're talking about strategic budgetary realignment. In some spaces, we are going to have to look at whether or not we continue with central office being staffed the way that it's being staffed and other non-low FTEs that we do have in the district. That's the way that you get to some of it, but we have to think through how would it and what would be the impact of those, because there's no way we can get through our budget of all of the nuances he just gave you without looking at increased costs and yet reducing our expenditures.
right. Okay. guiding principles. I would be curious if we might, and again, I don't have a solution tonight or a suggestion, so my apologies, but that last bullet around building on practices,
I can give you one. Just one that I think everybody been talking about, the village builders, like how we're talking about that, and we brought part of that in, we were talking about Essence, but how do you sustain a practice like that? And we know that's gonna be actually good with us based on the data, even preliminary, looking at the way people are starting to engage in our various schools. We know that that's a practice to make sure that we engage our schools in the community and community in the schools. But that's something when we're making these tough budgetary decisions, how do we prioritize that as one of our guiding principles to make sure that we're reaching our community?
okay. Which kind of gets into the goals, if I could just move to that slide, if you don't mind. So there's a lot of references to equity and equitable distribution. And I'm just curious, how have we applied any kind of an equity lens in our budgeting up to now? I know that strategic equity and excellence projects have used the equity tool in the past to describe how the initiative or effort, I don't know, meets some kind of equity perspective, but I am curious, like, when we're having to make tough decisions, like, is there a tool that the board is actually using to prioritize those who are the furthest from opportunity, the furthest from access, the folks that we know must be somewhat protected in the budget? I'm just curious, like, have we, the board, because it says utilize the board's educational equity tool for decision-making. And so I'm just curious how we've used that through the budget development process.
I think this is gonna be a great opportunity for us to live out those words. We've been saying that. And some of our key priorities that we do have, like expanding 4K, I think that's something that we've all weighed in on, the board has weighed in on pretty heavy in terms of specific tools so that you know that, hey, I am budgeting first with equity in mind. That's something that we can continue to collaborate on. We're talking about that when we're trying to give access to students more. But what's the tool? What's the metric to say that this is what we're really doing?
Okay. Ross, did you have anything that you wanted to add on the back end of how folks have been using the equity tool when they've brought forward?
The only specific things I'd highlight is how we continuously look at significant measures we know that already exist, especially related to poverty status in some of our schools and how that affects education resources, deployment of staff resources such as interventionists and other staff members. We use that by default each year to make sure that those services are being addressed in specific buildings. That includes all aspects, not just regular education, but special education and additional services as well.
Okay. Thank you. And then the last question that I have for tonight right now is on slide 13, where you gave us a great graph showing the revenue limit history. So in the status quo graph, bar, where we would get 0 per pupil, there's still an orange bar of hold harmless. In the bar next to that, if we were to get the higher level per pupil from, and the DPI request was granted, the orange bar for hold harmless disappears. Can you explain that? I don't understand that.
Yes, so again, the way hold harmless exemptions are generated, if the multiplier available to us and our student enrollment from one year to the next falls, it creates a situation where the state brings you back up to the prior year calculation. Under the bar chart you're referencing here, if we received the DPI budgetary request, we would not be looking at a hold harmless exemption. Incremental increase in the revenue limit for next year, with or without the DPI budgetary request, is still incorporating last year's impact.
Hmm,
So the 22-23 school year has that orange piece you referenced. That piece gets subtracted in both scenarios the following year.
okay,
But you're right, this does mean that if the request came through, that piece would not be on display or would not be jeopardizing 24-25 in the same way it would be if we got a 0.
got it. Okay, thank you for that.
And the specific numbers to that are actually on slide 15. The hold harmless exemption under 0 would be roughly $3 million based on current projections and would go to 0 in the DPI.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
I can see that. Okay. Great, thank you. No, I'm good.
Board Member Castro.
Thank you. 2.5 questions. So the first one is, I guess for the whole team that is helping input the budget. The first question is, how are you all prioritizing programs, initiatives, and strategies that align with our strategic framework, that are aligned with our past investments / priorities of the board and are popular with the community? Just what is your method of prioritization, and can you give an example?
Many of the priorities we've already brought forward are, especially those on ESSER, are still in a performance phase. But as we bring forward what we're going to entertain for future years, if not funded on ESSER, we've already started examining what priorities would be squeezed out by maintaining those things. Dr. Jenkins mentioned one that we're already trying to maintain for future years past ESSER. But specific examples is, I know that we've had a primary focus on full day 4K for the last several years. Each year that we've added to full day 4K, we've had to identify other areas of the budget that we're not able to either progress or sustain. And we continue to do that work each year on existing and on upcoming priorities.
And a part of it too, our priorities looking at classrooms. We know the board has a policy around classroom size, but we're trying to make sure too that we have equity. I think we really did as a team a very good job of trying to maintain during the pandemic some of our schools who had fallen enrollment, but maintaining the staffing levels so the students at those schools with title or less had more resources, it wasn't more, it was appropriate resources and support for what they needed based upon historical trends. But as we continue, classrooms will be the priority for us, and everything away from the classroom. We're going to have to take second and third looks in terms of how it will impact learning environments in our schools. So classroom be the first thing, staff, and then outside of that, we begin to make some other decisions.
Got it. And then my last question is, how do you recommend we navigate the state budget uncertainty? So for example, our budget would look different if we had a $0 per pupil increase versus a $350 per pupil increase. Some years we've passed multiple budgets. So what is your recommendation on how we navigate that budget uncertainty?
So in previous years where we've had a multiple budget scenario, that's typically been around a referendum question. In the situation we find ourselves in now, hard not to plan for we are reasonably foresee as the worst case scenario. And I don't say that to be pessimistic or to shortchange the budget development itself. Variances on the table between a 0 and 350, which again is the largest single increase ever revenue limit history, is too large to get wrong. So I'd rather have us plan for a situation where we get a 0, like we've seen happen to us in years past, than plan for the DPI budget request and be wrong.
I would have to support what Ross is saying too, because of the rate of inflation we've been seeing is making the budgetary process challenging, and we're feeling the effects. The 0-0 still now, and that's going to play out even more. So to go really heavy in terms of under preparing, it could be somewhat very devastating. So we have to be very conservative at this point. We could always add back, and what we're looking at as a team, if there is to a positive the recommendation being out there, if anything comes through, we're gonna be prepared to have a list of what we can add back that we have.
Got it. Thank you. And then just last comment is that it sounds like, you know, it is easier to build a budget up to add on than it is to take away from a budget.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, okay, board member Vandermill and then board member Pearson.
Certainly, thank you, Maya. I didn't mean to cut.
I saw you here.
Just some things that'd be really helpful for me. One, I'd like to see the stop-do list. I think we need to see it. I think I need to know where the cuts are coming from. Two, the last time Nichelle, we used the equity tool was on the class size policy a few years ago. I think it was Chris's first year on the board because Ananda suggested using it to make some of those decisions. I don't recall how much we used it. I don't recall we did use it. As for me and the budget, yes, these are sobering facts, but there are two things I really need to, three things I really need to focus on. Just for me, I can't, equity projects to me can't be done until we know what we can do to keep our staff without cutting our classroom staff, without having large class sizes that ignores that policy. I feel that learning will be hurt. That's my stance on that. When it comes to the equity tool, absolutely, we need to use it more, not less. But the other thing that I'm really worried about is that we say we could add back and be conservative on the budget. Here's one thing, we've tried that with our staff and we didn't have any. And that's why I worry about that, because you can't recreate staff and you can't replace people who aren't there, but also you can't replace quality. So I'm thinking we have to restructure it and start instead of a compensation study, which I think might be honestly a little financially over the top. We start by seeing what where the other districts are solely on base wage, and we try and do what we can. We do solely what is based not on what a study or a consultant does, but on what our healthcare costs are. We make sure that our lowest paid workers are not paying more for healthcare, and our hourly workers than what they're making. I think those have to be those are my priorities. So I wanted to put those in there. Thank you.
Board member Pearson. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Jenkins.
I just want to clarify, just want to make sure that you're Nichols.
Oh, yeah. I was like, yeah.
They just got a, you know.
They both start with N on the first letter.
So I want to just make sure that you did bring up a very key point in terms of when we start talking about benefits, in terms of how we're costing it out and making sure that our lowest paid wage earners are not paying more. Am I clear hearing you say that?
That is correct.
Right, and then looking at the whole scope in terms of how we provide benefits, then looking at base wages. Are you saying that and not?
I'm not allowed to say that at this meeting because I was told I'm not allowed to mention those two words.
Right, okay, I just wanted to make sure.
But that is
I was
correct.
trying to clarify.
That is absolutely correct, but I was told that at the beginning that those topics were not to be discussed, so I was trying to phrase it the best possible way without saying the words I'm not allowed to say.
You're exactly right, we should be talking.
Board member Pearson.
So my first question is kind of along the line of just on Michelle's question about what we're spending on the restricted investment funding. That we may do, hopefully invest in based off of our budget, not relying on us, sir. But what's the timeline that you give us those programs that you've been funding on ESSER so far?
I'll work with the grant team and get something in a weekly update in the very future. We've already started discussing that.
Okay. My other question is just also about the stop due list. I know that that's something that we've talked about now for 6 months. And so it would be really nice to finally get the list. For
I mean,
something similar of like where we're at with that list and what things are we've stopped, we've actually stopped. And
and we're actually working, we already are working on that information for now. Just as a reminder, the stop due list we did last year did appear in the budget book in
Yeah.
the efficiencies area, so we'll be publishing that in the April draft budget as well. At the
for
very-
last year,
No, that was actually in the October.
the
book.
October one.
It was in April.
Yeah. Okay, so you're gonna plan on putting that in the April book, just an updated version of what?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay, it'd be
And-
nice to make, that we have, to see like historically what. He says it's in October. Final one,
In the efficiency.
yeah, and efficiencies. We feel like over time, we know the things that we've said that we've stopped doing, and it will be nice just to see like.
I will say,
progression.
I will say upfront that the status of what that looks like over the last 10 years have changed in form dramatically.
Oh,
but
not, it doesn't have to go
certainly-
that far back.
Yeah, we'll
I'm just
certainly.
thinking in the last like couple years,
Sure.
you know, yeah. Since we've really been having. Okay. And then my other question was just the reallocation of funds. Dr. Jenkins, you mentioned, for some of the schools, that may have a low enrollment. And how we are, making sure that the schools are funded appropriately. Their school enrollment, and are we allocating those funds that we, for instance, if one school that these are just purely just maybe $1 million. It's gonna be more than that, but $1 million, and say our expectation was that they had like 100 students, and then they ended up not having 100 students enrolled in like maybe 60. But their allocation was still like $1 million. Are we reallocating it to other schools that may need more funding, or like, how is that working?
I'll touch on a piece of it
Yeah.
in Russ, but through the
Yeah.
through the scheduling process, schools are aware, and we have been doing this, if you recall, like
Yeah.
one situation with the high school,
Mhm.
that we had to move an allocation, but we had informed them before. There was some lag time in there,
Yeah.
but particularly when we got to some of our elementary schools during the pandemic, we were very sensitive. We're under some class sizes, we under, but we held them harmless. But as we're correcting now, and we're going forward, then they know that their number will also be impacted by the decisions we're making based on the appropriate class sizes that we've been keeping. So yeah, we were looking at it from an equity standpoint, but that's all schools, everyone knows
Right.
that they have the for the most part, guideline policy set the class size. We try to maintain that, but some of these schools were at the Title I level, we try to also protect them as well. Knowing instability within those schools will cause even more harm. So
Yeah.
we try to hold on to it.
Yeah. So then I just have a follow-up question then about that. So if we are like. Madison is changing a lot with, and that means that a lot of families are moving a lot within our district and within our city. Are we, for some of those schools that may be like, you know, the expected enrollment is 100, but they end up having 60. But because of, you know, families being transient and or just because of how the market is, Madison is not at 120. And so are we able to ensure that even if we are allocating a certain amount of fund that we can increase that at any time? Is it just around that April, once they get the information to us to be able for us to, okay.
It doesn't stop in April.
Yeah.
So our workbook process
Yeah.
begins the next couple of weeks.
Right.
Over the spring and summer months, our enrollment team and our curriculum team are constantly reviewing information and enrollment shifts in our buildings leading up until actual enrollment takes place in the
Right.
summer.
Right.
And up until third Friday, frankly, if we need to make specific adjustments or if where there's a significant deviation either from the enrollment projections themselves or just progressive change like you're saying about transient populations, that will impact how the building is staffed.
Right.
We've done things in the past couple of years to preserve staff in many places and not pull at the last minute. So we've also gone forward and given additional resources if populations appear where we expect. So that is an ongoing process up until the start of school that year.
Right.
And you've heard us say we're holding staff back,
Yeah.
15 staff. That's what helps us make those adjustments.
And I know there was a question before about seeing books a little earlier than April. So I'm just gonna put that out there again. Ross. No, I appreciate all the work that you do and get all the and everything. I think for me, it's just the fact that we do have like extremely difficult budget, as we can see. Just more information of how we can stay abreast as much as possible. But also, as the electeds, do our due diligence and ensuring like we can assist in other ways as well and advocating, as I've always mentioned, about spending.
Thank you, Board Member Pearson. Can I just ask, are you asking for the staffing information earlier? Or are you asking not for the actual budget work, but
Oh, not for the actual preliminary budget per se, that's in April.
you can take it
No.
deep breath.
It's like more of the staffing, but I do think that that is part of like the importance is that we're seeing like where things are at. I'm at the school level as well, so yeah, that's what I mean. Thank you for asking that question.
I would expect.
And I have a few questions too, and I guess one of mine in hearing some of the information that board members are asking for, I'm gonna take us back, Ross, to those equity staffing charts that have been in previous board budgets that Ross and I have actually talked about and how to, what I've always liked about those, and I know that they've in the past been a year delayed, so they're not necessarily as up to date as we would like based on when we get information and when that snapshot and what it shows. But I think it gives everybody a really good snapshot of where our schools are at with their enrollment, whether they're a title school, whether they have DLI programs, the number of students, they have enrolled, the number of special education students, and then how the staff falls out from that. And it's basically kind of like a snapshot of our staffing model and how we staff our schools based on the needs of our students. And so I guess I would encourage us to get that to the board when it's possible so that we can sort of see that as a snapshot.
Yeah, and I do have Wendy, our new budget manager, working on that now. So I'm teaching her how to
Congrats.
create that process again, as we've done years past. And I look forward to bringing that to the board in a future weekly update very soon.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
I just want to be clear, is it going to reflect current year? and past?
Correct.
Okay.
I also want to remind that the document that board member Gomez-Schmidt is referencing is based on available data at a certain point in time. Doing it prospectively with the same analytics, especially demographics and enrollment, is almost premature. It'd be very difficult to, unless we used current year demographics against next year's projections. I don't know if it would really tell us much.
That's why I wanted to clarify
Yeah.
that, because yes, you can get it. How accurate would be, and I just want to make sure we're saying that out here that everyone knows, we can get it. But in comparison to historical data, may not represent the same thing. So let's talk about it. It's going to be apples and oranges, but maybe it's a good step forward so as we can define it as we move forward.
Right. Yeah, that would be great because I think having that type of information would be really helpful. Another question that I have is, we're gonna have a lot of uncertainty in this budget and we're not gonna know the revenues coming in for a while. But there are some pieces that are sort of on our end with strategic planning and the compensation study results and realignment proposals and things that we're doing more on, like, again, our strategic planning end. So I guess I'm curious, Dr. Jenkins, how and when we see that working into the budget process as we work through it this spring, looking towards the June budget. So which pieces are we going to have available? I know we're in the midst of doing the strategic framework realignment too. So which pieces will we have to factor into this year's budget?
Yeah, I'm really hopeful that we're gonna have a strategic framework from joint ventures, that data coming back to us to help inform the recalibration that we're talking about. We've had many conversations already and just getting more and more data on that end. I'm hoping that can help us know that it will help us inform this budget as we're moving out, as we hear the priorities from everyone, we hear from the board. In terms of the salary piece with the compensation study, it's difficult to get individual district our size to get the firms to commit to wanting to do our district. We put it out now and very few. I think we have one.
We're in discussions with one.
We're in discussion with one. I was hoping to get more people jump on it, but we have a large size district, but that data will inform us. We need to do it, even if it's not for now, so it can inform us for the future. There are some other tools that we can use, like Forecast 5, like some other districts use that, not as accurate as the compensation study. When you do a compensation study, you all talk also revisiting, job responsibilities and things like that as well. So hopefully we can get that in. If we get it in, we'll include it. If not, we still need to move forward with that, even for future budgeting. And that leads to this budget process we're doing now. It's just one step. We need to take the long view in order to get our district strategically aligned and appropriately resourced. This is going to be a multi-year process for our budget.
I guess one of the things that I would suggest as we're doing this compensation study, if we can somehow take a look at our central office and how it's staffed, and not just about eliminating, I guess, vacant positions, because I know that positions have been stacked upon positions just out of necessity. And I have appreciated all that work that has gone in both central office and in our schools to do that. But I think we really need to look at, to run our district efficiently, what is needed at central office, what is needed with schools to get back to a stable baseline so that everybody is not constantly overwhelmed. And I know that it's easy as we get into these difficult budget discussions and decisions to say, let's just cut from central office over and over and over. But it's been done before and it's been done a lot. I've watched it a lot over the last 5 to 7 years. And there's at a point for a district our size where there are functions that we need central office to do that you can't cut anymore. But obviously there's also efficiencies that we can find. So I would be very interested in a specific central office component to that. Looking at districts our size and what they need to be able to function effectively. And I don't know if there's any models out there, but everybody grapples with that piece.
And there are models out there that do this right now. We've been stretched with getting the number of, I would like to see responses to what we want to see, because it does too go as in. It's not just even central office. They're going to look at everything, how we operated. And you're right, it's cumulative coming in. Historically, we have stuck one job on top of another job on top of another job, and that causes burnout. And that's a terrible thing to do during these times when we're having staffing shortages.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more things. Ross, one of the things, the projected impacts that really struck me is just the budgetary growth being minimal after repeated whole timeless and declining enrollment exemptions, and just how much that impacts our district and our ability to move forward on the things that we do prioritize. And so going back to the guiding principles, and we had one of the principles that we had in place, like you talked about, was the stability in the schools. And I would like to say that I was really proud of the strategy that we took during COVID to make sure that we had the supports and we had the stability that our schools and our students needed. Now, at the same time, in the revenue forecast, we talk about the declining enrollment exemptions exist to give districts time to adapt. So with our declining enrollment in COVID, at the same time, we're trying to maintain stability in our schools. We're at a point where we need to adapt. Like we maintain the stability and now we have to adjust due to the declining enrollment that we've seen over these number of years. And so can you just talk about that like inflection point? And it feels like that's where we're at.
No, I'm glad. Thank you for the question. I do want to highlight that the goals around stability are not in conflict with the situation we're facing, but I do understand your point. There is certainly a need for us to remain as stable as possible. And while we've had certain abilities to maintain staffing level we've seen in previous years, with higher enrollment and different funding streams, yes, we are at a point now where these repeated years of exemptions are creating enough downward pressure that we're going to have to adapt. So you're absolutely right on that front.
That's instructionally. We're gonna have to adapt. We start talking about multi-age classroom. We're gonna have to adapt. You have to look at everything in this process, from our facilities to the academics, how we do different things. And it's not necessarily even eliminate some of that. How do we become more efficient to be able to do something and repurpose? We're still with learning, still with children in there. How can we do that as a district? Because some of them may even impact transportation. Start thinking about these things, but that's a larger conversation that we have to have. And it's, I think we have to have it. We're at that point.
Yeah. And I look at this chart again on the projected impacts and the change in the revenue limit, the theoretical 2 columns that even if we were to get that $350 per pupil increase that is recommended by TEPI, which still has to go through our budget process with the legislature, even if we got that, it would only change our revenue limit by 2.2%. And so if it was at a 0 again, which I'm hoping we're not in that scenario, it would be at a 0.57%. And it's even worse when you talk about if we didn't have our operating referendum. And when I think about the situation that we're in, that was not what the operating referendum was intended for, but it is really important. And so I'm very thankful to our taxpayers who have allowed us this operating referendum to keep moving forward. I guess my last question is, and I know we're talking just about revenue forecasts, and next month we'll start talking about costs and expenses. But if you're talking, our revenue only going up by 2.2%, what is how much do costs usually go up? If you're talking about an average year, I know it depends on what investments you make, but
If we use the consumer price index as a balance, we know that in recent years, we've been as low as a 0.13 CPI change. And last year was the highest we've seen in 40 years. Current year, the statistics from WRC are out there. The last calendar year was roughly 8%. So yes, factoring in everything we know at the moment, declining enrollment and potential state investment, we're looking at a 6% roughly gap in funding authority to continue operations. That's not including any non-revenue limit impacts. If we had to change the categorical aid reimbursement, I mentioned at the very beginning, that could have an impact. But we're outside the revenue limit. Until we have firm information, I can't rely on that information. It's too big of a variance.
yeah. And so I guess just my final closing statement will just be that I appreciated Board Member Castro saying, I think starting point has to be with that grade of uncertainty. The starting point has to be lower, has to be conservative until we know more information going forward about our budget. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, Board Member Nichols.
My final question now is going back to the budget timeline. In February, we'll have compensation confirmation, staffing projections with workbook release and talking about or summer semester is on the timeline.
Yes.
Okay. I also heard though tonight several references to our class size policy as perhaps one of the things that we may have to reevaluate or, look at in terms of applying equity or efficiency. So I guess I'm wondering, like, where in the timeline would that conversation happen? Would that come in the February conversation as we're talking about staffing projections and workbook release?
Are you talking specifically about policy review or are you talking about implementation of the existing work? Because we're already working on that.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I should clarify what Dr. Jenkins meant. I thought I heard a reference to the class size policy as potentially a way for us to look at more, I don't know, our adaptation or.
What I am saying, when we're talking about complexities of this budget, what we're gonna have, we have to consider everything a discussion about what we are. And we have our guiding principles, but where are we? Guiding principles up against the resources we have versus the expenses. And like you said, you have to talk about it. And not in a way that's going to take away. I just think just with the pandemic, everything we have going on right now, the adaptability piece that we were getting at when we were talking earlier about planning enrollment, we have to begin to rethink things that we've done. Just because we've done it this way doesn't mean that it's the best to continue to move in that direction. And that's just what you've seen others do. We had to do that, make some adjustments as we go away.
I guess I'd just like to clarify that. To me, the budget goals include how we are implementing the class size policy. I was not anticipating that we are looking to change the class size policy. I was thinking we were focusing on reducing the number of sections below minimum of the board's class size policy, because I know that is an issue. When you have class sizes that are below the minimum, then you can't allocate, the same amount of resources in other ways. And so is that the main strategy around class size that we're talking about?
That would be one of the main strategies that we're talking about, but it's multiplicated. And I just I'm going to bring to you the discussions and what's going to put us in the best position to make sure that we not only balance the budget, but we leave ourselves in a situation where we can thrive academically as well. First strategy is, yes, looking at that and making some decisions about those classes that we have, continue to hold on that fall below that class size average.
Okay, and I would like to make sure we're looking at the ones that are falling above class size and why that might be happening and what we need to do to realign there too, to make sure that we're not going above in places where that has happened too.
Most definitely. That was kind of the, when I was making earlier, when Board Pearson talked about if you went up, we had projected 100, so you went up to 120. We make those adjustments as well, and that's why we hold back new staff to be able to make that in both directions.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just follow up to that. So thank you for clarifying and bringing in a little bit more context. I think for me, if we're going to have a conversation that also includes thinking about how we're allocating resources out at schools and looking at our class sizes, if we can have that conversation, then I also feel like some of the things that have been funded with ESSER that people may want to keep doing may not be on the table either. Like I think we have to consider all of the things. And so I've heard for many years in our district, sometimes when we get to our class size policy conversation and the allocation of resources out to schools, sometimes I've heard language around creating efficiency that does not come across as being human-centered. It does not, I don't know if that's efficient for the teacher in the classroom, right? What, You know what I mean? So I just think that, yes, we need to discuss all of the ways in which we may be able to find some reductions in our budget and try to work within the constraints that we have. I just would prefer that if we're going to look at class size, we're also coming forward with other things that can be considered as well.
And I would like to just reinforce to what I said earlier, everything we touch, we're gonna be as far away from the classroom as possible. Classroom is the last thing, anytime you're doing a budget, that you ever wanna touch. And I think it doesn't prevent us from thinking differently about how we're delivering education. Right now, across the country, it's not working for everyone what we have been doing. So this is an opportunity for us to begin to think as a community, and we're gonna be hearing from our community as we're going out to strategic recalibration. What do we need to do to make connections with our students so that they can follow their passion and teachers can still have what we need to have in terms of being able to do it in an environment that's really conducive to the highest levels of learning.
Board Member Vanderbilt, you had your hand up.
Yes, I want to raise Michelle's point and give it the even more attention, because we're going to discuss class size policy. I think she's right that they aren't the most human-centric decisions. We've seen that some of the most successful programs in our district, I'm taking AVITOPS. Part of the reason AVITOPS is as successful as the small class sizes. It is the community. And if we are going to focus on equity, which I think we need to do, and to me, equity means very simply those who are historically marginalized, whether they be Black, Brown, disabled, are historically marginalized, including Native American populations, must be seen before anyone else, because they're the ones who've been harmed the most. But if we're going to do that, I think we need to be careful on creating an even larger class size when we have kids who need more support, not less. So I just urge us to focus on enforcing the minimum, what classes that don't meet the minimum. I think that would be a better approach than the other, unless we have no other choice.
Thank you for that comment.
Thank you for the presentation tonight. This is really helpful. I think we have a lot of work in front of us as we look to create this budget for next year. I would encourage us to continue these conversations about what information the board needs and in what order to help make the decisions and move the work forward. So I definitely am looking forward to these continued conversations and how we can support the work forward.
That's what we needed.
So thank you for those comments, and I'll look forward to following up with that in our board purpose too, so that we can clear exactly what it is that you're asking. And we could do this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are we?
Cindy Green. There she goes.
I'm on here. Did we want to walk through the summer school slide?
Well, I'm not sure.
On the notice I signed, I didn't see the summer school as on there. I didn't realize it was going to be a separate item, that it was a item with the budget. I assumed it was a separate item. So I wasn't sure if we are noticed correctly point of order.
It was added, it's in with the this same topic around the budget, and there was a memo attached to continue this conversation.
As general counsel, this is.
The summer pay rate proposal.
Yep.
General counsel,
As if Sherry can come on.
is Sherry available?
I am here. What is the question about?
The question was, on the summer school pay. I assumed it had to be a separate item. It wasn't noticed as a separate item, but I did see it as part of the budget issue, so I'm not sure if we are noticed to discuss it. And I wanted to be completely clear, so I raised a point of order.
Okay, actually, it is part of the budget conversation. This is one of the areas where we typically pull out early and have budget conversations about summer school early, usually around this time or in March. And they're typically noticed the same way as being under the budget. But Cindy, it was separated because Cindy has to speak to it because she's over curriculum and instruction.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I just wanted to be sure because I didn't want to break any open meetings laws.
Okay.
And just for future reference, I would suggest that we just make sure that it gets not only included as an agenda item and attached to the agenda, but that it actually shows up in board docs as being part of the budget development process. So going back and looking at those before, it'll usually say discussion, presentation, and then early approvals or early requests or something like that within how it's noticed. So if we can do that going forward, I think that would clarify.
Okay.
Thank you.
We can make that change.
Okay, Cindy, go ahead.
Thank you, everyone, and sorry if there was any confusion at all. We just wanted to come back to the summer pay scenario and the conversation that we had at the instruction work group the other week. As a reminder, our recommendation is to ensure that we have a competitive summer school hourly wage for our teachers. And our recommendation is for this upcoming summer to have our teacher hourly rate at $40 an hour. We believe this is a one-time measure. We also are putting forth to the superintendent language changes in our handbook that would give us some flexibility in terms of our summer school pay rate, and that would be at a rate of no less than $28 an hour. We want to be careful about not locking ourselves into a single pay rate, but to ensure that we have a pay rate that can not only be competitive, but ensure that we have the highest quality summer program. We believe that having this summer program and also securing competitive rate for our staff will be critically important to continue with the learning loss that happened through the pandemic, acceleration of learning, and also re-engagement for our students before the beginning of the school year. We know summer school serves the majority of our students that identify as a student of color and also students with IEPs, and we want to ensure that we have high quality teaching staff and competitive rates for that. So we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to discuss this again tonight. I want to remind the board that the recommendation is within the already approved summer budget. So if you remember, summer school budget toggles 2 fiscal years. So there's a portion of our summer school budget that is in this fiscal year that has already been approved. And then there is a portion of the summer school budget that will be in the next year, fiscal 24's budget. We intentionally are creating a cap for our enrollment in order to ensure that we serve 4,000 students and pay our teachers at a competitive rate. I will pause there to turn it back over to you, Board Member Gomes-Schmidt, and to see what questions might be coming up.
All right, thank you, Ms. Green. Board Member Vandermeulen.
I'm glad that Cindy, thank you, and I'm glad you mentioned IEPs because I'd like to know what the rate of the SEAs at summer school would go up, and the rate of EAs at summer school and behavioral assistants, would they remain the same? Is it only teachers? Are we going to split the groups? How exactly would that work?
So this recommendation is for our teacher pay, and our SEAs and other support staff would receive their hourly wage, which would be the wage that they have right now, which includes that $5 an hour increase.
Thank you. Actually, no, I have one more question, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have one more. I'm interested in the $40 at the same point. As I said, I'm worried about this upcoming budget, but I'm more worried about our SEAs. We don't have enough of them. We, even with the raise, we're still struggling in the school year, and I don't,
We're noticed for that.
problem is that I don't think I can make a decision between the two. And I can't so I'll just say this. I can't choose one over the other, so it would be a hard no for me.
Anybody else? Okay, board member Simkin?
Cindy, when in the year do you generally receive staff commitments for summer school?
We start, ideally, we would begin now and we would secure staff no later than the beginning of March. It's important that we know who our staff is so that we can ensure that we have the programming. I'll use secondary as an example. I brought this up earlier in the month that in order to ensure we have the appropriate courses for students that they need for credit recovery and or other disciplines that we're trying to offer for just enrichment opportunities, we can't secure courses until we have staff. So now through the beginning of March is our ideal timeframe to have those staff secured so that we can then generate the student letters and get our students signed up and ready to go.
And how many teachers are you looking for to fully staff?
Off the top of my head, I don't know exactly. I would say a few hundred. Our student population that we're trying to serve is 4,000 students, and our class size in the summer is usually between 15 and 20 students, give or take the section and or the grade level.
Okay, and then can you walk us through one more time? You said that this money is already allocated in the budget. So what is the request that we need to be approving?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Yes, it is already in this fiscal year's budget. And as Ross is in the process of developing the budget that preliminary will be seen by the board in April, the same amount that we have previously allocated is in there. What we are asking is that the board, once Dr. Jenkins is able to review the recommendation change in the handbook, that is the piece that we will need the board to approve. In terms of the budgetary standpoint, as long as we understand the budget is already set forth for this fiscal year and next fiscal year, we are working within a budget that we are not requesting any additions or adds to. So it is about the language that currently exists in our handbook that indicates teachers get paid $25 an hour.
Okay, and
Dr.
so,
Jenkins, I just wanted to turn it to Dr. Jenkins just to see if he wanted to chime into what I said before you ask your additional questions, Board Member Simkin.
Yeah, you've covered it pretty well, so not at this time.
okay, so for the additional salary, is the reason why we already have this allocated because of the lower enrollment because of lack of staffing for this last year? Is that how we've gotten to this point, or is it something else?
No. Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll just give some numbers in the past. So again, we are proposing that we cap enrollment at $4,000 to work within the existing budget. We know there's no more money to give, so we want to ensure that we create both a quality summer programming for our students and a competitive wage for our staff to be able to have high quality staff to a high quality program. Previously, depending on the year that we look at for staff rate, we have invited sometimes up to 7,000 students. On average, we have served about 5,500 students, and we've done that within the same budgetary amount that we have right now. The reason we are able to run our program this upcoming summer and intend to pay our teaching staff $40 an hour is because we are capping the number of students we will serve at 4,000. So potentially less students than we have served in the past.
And how will you be deciding who does or doesn't get an invitation?
Yeah, so we will still send invitations out to all students that are eligible. Usually we get about, send out about, like I said, almost 7,000 invitations, and we get about 5,000 to 4,000 students. So we always get less students than we send out invitations. We will prioritize students based on a variety of criteria. We have considered students that are at schools that are identified as ATSI, which is a federal designation. We've considered students at the primary levels that are in most need based on the criteria that invites them to summer school. At the secondary level for high school, we will prioritize students in need of credit recovery. Simultaneously, I want to remind the board that we're trying to create additional programming outside of this budget through potential ESSER dollars, so that we can not only serve these 4,000 students through the kind of more academic approach, but also be able to provide that summer arts academy for our students as well, so that we're able to go wider in our reach for students.
Okay, that clarification helps quite a bit. Thank you.
And Board Member Nichols, I just want to clarify, because you haven't been through I'm sorry, did I say Nichols?
I don't know why I'm the popular.
Board Member Simpkin. As we're moving through the budget process, I think there are going to be some other early approvals that we need to do, because we're going to hire staff or spend the money before we actually approve that budget at the end of June. And so I think, Cindy, that's one of the reasons for the early approval too, right? Is that we have to approve, if we're going to hire staff for this position, we have to have that funding approved in order to do that. So there's going to be a number of early approvals that we'll work through as we work through the budget, so that we can start doing the work.
I appreciate you saying that out loud, because it feels pretty counterintuitive right now to be talking about increasing spending in any area while at the same time talking about significant cuts. I think that because we're not actually talking about increasing spending, I can support this. If this was an increase in spending, I would need to see that the big picture. So Cindy, your clarifications helped quite a bit.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Board Member Pearson.
Okay, just a second. Just gotta get back to my screen. Okay. So my question is just alongside what Nikki was mentioning a little earlier. And I know Ross's eyes got a little bit. I know that previously, Cindy, we were, and this is still within the line of, okay, so just bear with me. But it still follows in line with what we talked about. Previously in the conversation that we had in January at our last instruction work group meeting, was that we are moving away from the half day to the full day of summer school, which is great, right? It's great. As a parent, I think it's great. However, it brings up the question of support and staffing. And I know that we're increasing for teachers. However, if we have children who, based off of what Laura just mentioned about who is being prioritized and coming into summer school, there's gonna need for more support. And so with that, are we somehow, and I know you just mentioned that it's gonna be the same as previous, But even right now, currently, based off of what we know, that group of staff is very limited, even though the need is high. So are we also finding some ways with summer school, ensuring that there is enough support staff with possibly doing some kind of increase for those staff that might be coming in for the summer to help support the students, especially if we're moving away from the half day to more of the full day environment for summer school. And let me know if that doesn't make sense, but.
No, your question makes sense. I will start. I would say we have not had that conversation around an increase in their pay. I don't know what that means from a handbook standpoint, but that hasn't been part of the conversation. I'll just say that. I will remind the board that we are proposing to add village builders on top of our CC staff, as well as other support staff, because we really want to focus on both kind of the community engagement with families. We want to focus on mental health support. So some of the additional support staff, such as counselors, PSTs, et cetera, are part of our staffing plan for summer. But I'll just pause there in terms of my response that we have not had that conversation about CC teachers at this time. Sorry, SEA support staff, my bad.
I mean, I wish I would have thought about this question when we had the chance to really kind of discuss a little more about summer. But it was just something that just popped in my head as we're talking about the compensation, and something that I thought about actually today. And how we're ensuring that, you know, we have enough support. I know that we've heard from a lot of folks in different areas, and I won't mention specific, that even if we get the teachers that we need to staff the full day, it still is helpful to have the support staff that is there for, you know, children that may need extra support. So, yeah, my hope is that.
I'm sorry. I want to just provide one more piece of clarification around that, and I don't know if that will be helpful. So in the summer, our support staff, whether it's the SEA or others, they receive their hourly rate. So what they get during the school year, plus that kind of plus $5. Teaching staff, as a reminder, we're getting $25 to $28, which usually is much lower than their hourly rate, which is one of the reasons also why we wanted to at least try to go to $40, which is not most teachers' hourly rate. I think the average teacher salary is actually higher than $40, but we were trying to get them something a little more competitive and closer to what their hourly rate was. So I just wanted to provide the distinction also in terms of why we haven't had the discussion around support staff, because they are getting their hourly rate versus our teaching staff that during the summertime that are in our regular programs are not getting it.
And thank you, Cindy, for that. I appreciate that. And by no means am I questioning that, because I'm definitely in support of that. It's just, I know that moving from a half day to a full day, ensuring that we keep staff, ensuring that staff actually want to do summer, and they're giving up their time to be able to, you know, teach in the summer, is making sure that they feel supported, and making sure that the folks that are also supporting also feel supported as well. So, you know, the more that we can invest in our teachers and our support staff and other building folks, the better I think the quality, and ensuring that, you know, our kids feel good about school as well, and that we can hopefully hit off with our 4,000 students in the summer, where summer school isn't a drag, but they, you know, kids wanna be in our buildings in the summer. So that's it.
Thank you. Board Member Castro.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say that summer school is an important tool to maintain and advance academic and social outcomes for our students, and our ability to staff this program is important. And so I am impressed that we have found a way to include some level of pay increase for staff in this program so that we can fully staff it while keeping in the same funding footprint as prior years. And it sounds like, there are a few different ways to do this. In support, we could see different scenarios where maybe we can move some of the money around, where instead of $40, it's $35, and we can throw that other money towards increases for other staff. But in general, I think raising, like as a base level, raising the pay rate for summer school staff, especially for teachers, so it's in line with their pay rate for the school year, is important. Thanks.
Board Member Nichols.
Yes, I wanted to go to the supplemental chart that shows summer school teacher rates for outlying districts. DeForest is at 28, Middleton 28, Milton 25, Monona Grove 25, Stoughton 26.50, Sun Prairie up to 32, Verona $40 for credit. I don't exactly know what that means. $28 non-credit. Wanakee at 30 and a $25 rate. So my wondering is, based on where the other districts are, with the exception of Verona, how did you land on the 40 and not maybe the 35? Because I know you presented a chart in the memo. I'm just curious, like, why 40 instead of maybe the 35?
The chart was actually provided in the weekly update.
Oh,
So from the HR department, it was part of what board had requested for this discussion.
Yeah, let me speak.
Yeah, oh,
Then Cindy, you definitely could come in. One of the things that we've been thinking about, and we've been saying it, that summer school is the platform to lift us off for the fall, and we know we've learned. We had it in once before the $40. We were trying to get individuals in, and it really did not have that much of an impact coming right out of the pandemic year because everybody was tired. It was down.
right.
We were tired even last summer, and we want to make sure it's approximately, just so that everyone knows, we're looking to hire about 225 teachers, along with you look at the SEAs, we want to hire as well. And we'll come back with the accurate number. But when you just simply take $18, between $15 and $20, and then say 18, and then divide it from 4,000, how many do we actually need? If you want to know those numbers, that's just an approximate for you. But we wanted to get out there early. We know how important it is, and we put it out there. We know we're going to be competing. Other districts are already started to hire. You see jobs posted already. They decided their rates, and we wanted our teachers to be excited. It's a time to build a little bit of morale and show that we're investing in our staff. I am really enjoying this discussion. It's an area that just came up. Castro and even what all of you have said, I appreciate that. But I think what Board Member Simpkins said, we didn't want to come in here with an increase. We're trying to do it within existing. I just can't say it any other way. We're trying to make the best out of the situation that's here, doing that we've been giving our students the best opportunity. So I said to the team, let's go $40 coming out the gate so we can get all the teachers that we need, scramble May and June, trying to hire people for summer school. Then we take it up. And we also realized from that too, when we picked it up almost like we dropped out. We're not doing the other things to take care of our staff, social, emotionally, and showing them that we value them. They don't respond, and I totally understand that. And that's one of the number one reasons cited teachers leaving. It's not because of just all pay. It's about how they feel, how we treat them. And I think that this is a way to show that we're investing in our staff.
Yeah.
Well, I'm totally wrong. Nothing scientific about what I just said.
No, I appreciate, so let me say it this way. The $40 recommendation that you all have is obviously within budget. So to Board Member Simpkins' question earlier, it doesn't seem like that's the thing that we really need to vote on. We've already approved a summer school budget. And you all aren't coming in exceeding that. The issue is really the handbook language, and wanting to, at some point, be able to make sure that our handbook language reflects, this type of, I think the thing that I'm wondering about when I ask the question about why 40 and not 35, it's not about the value of our teachers. It's more about the budget conversation we just had, which is, we said that one of our guiding principles would be taking a multi-year view, meaning looking backwards and looking forwards. So even if we have it for this summer, what I'm worried about is what happens next summer if we can't sustain $40, right? Like, and so I guess what I'm wondering is, like, would it at least be more financially, I don't know, like, wise to say, we're gonna go up above where all the other districts are. Let's look at 35, but maybe not go all the way to the max right now, just because we're in a really uncertain budget view right now. You know what I mean? And I would hate for staff to say, like, well, we've been at 40. That's kind of what we hope we want. You know, it's hard to go back. Yes, to board members' point, it's hard to go back. That's the only reason I'm asking it, like, why we went straight to the top instead of maybe a nice, like, kind of incremental increase. But I'd hope that doesn't sound insensitive. I'm not saying our staff aren't worth the $40. I'm just thinking about, yeah, what it means for the next time we're having this conversation. So that's the only reason I raised it.
And I mean, perfectly fine. I mean, I think, as I said to you, you asked why would I do that? That's why I did it. I'm still trying to, and not knowing, and I'm looking forward. I'm actually looking way out and saying that we may not, chances are, we're not gonna have it moving forward. That's why in the handbook, especially we said not less than 28. We have to separate those two and understanding. Dollars are there today are not dollars that are guaranteed tomorrow. And so whether someone doesn't want it or not, then hey, summer school is voluntary. It's not less than $28. That's what I would say to anyone. And I would hope it's reciprocal, our relationship towards staff, but their relationship towards us. When we have it, we can do this. When we don't, that's why we have a handbook, and that's to respect both sides. It's not just respect teachers, it's to respect administrators, our community, everybody being fiscally responsible. So I like the language which the team came up with, not less than $28, and that would still be in alignment with everybody else in our area.
Board Member Castro, did you have a question? Did you have your hand up?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't miss it. Board Member Nichols, I appreciate that. And that was sort of going to be my comment in relation to this chart that was provided for us. Cindy, my question is if we did the $35 an hour versus the 40, can we serve more students? I know we're putting a cap at 4,000 and that seems based on the amount that we're going to pay teachers. Can we serve more students, or is the 4,000 our capacity, like calculation based on what we got for staffing last year and what we think we can do based on our facilities and things like that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I just want to add one additional thing to what Dr. Jenkins said back to Board Member Nichols' question, was that in addition to kind of, again, that $40 an hour, that isn't even at our average teacher salary range, which is why we were trying to find kind of this sweet spot. And since we had used 40 before and had looked at the surrounding districts. So in addition to kind of Dr. Jenkins putting that recommendation out there, I just wanted to add those additional pieces. To your question, potentially, but we have already identified the sites for the summer, and we have identified 8 sites for the summer. We all know that our high school sites are closed over the summer, and we know that we're also doing building renovation, building maintenance, building just like cleaning in many of our other buildings. So we tried to go from 10 sites to 8 sites to focus around like this containment of 4,000 capacity, and also try and as much as possible identify sites that didn't need work to allow for the other sites to have some of the maintenance as well. So there's a couple of factors that went into that. And so I would say all that to say, maybe we could go above 4,000, but summer school, we start working really in October, and we've started to kind of work on the site, started to think about what each site can have capacity due to elementary, middle, and potentially high school being in some of these locations. So that's my answer. It's not, I don't know that I have a yes, we could, and I don't want to say a hard no, but I would lean closer towards the gate has already opened, and it would be challenging to try and make those types of shifts at this point.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. I guess just from my perspective, I understand the cautious approach that Board Member Nichols explained and do appreciate that. So, I think that would be part of my consideration as we move forward towards a vote on this next week.
Yeah, it would potentially be cost savings if we go with a less. And I also want to not forget to add in MSCR. And remember, we're pairing kind of that morning time with that afternoon time. And so that is an important piece as well. And I think MSCR's capacity in terms of that 4,000 is about the tipping point. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other last questions on that? Okay, thank you very much, Cindy. I'm going to move us on to our next topic. Thank you to our presenters who have been very patient, waiting for us to move on to transportation. Tonight, we are going to talk about our transportation RFP and our update on that. Mr. Cedric Hodo and his team, a team of transportation experts, are here to talk about the RFP process that we're in the midst of right now for the 2023 school year. And with that, I will turn that over to Mr. Hodo.
All right, thank you. Make sure. Yeah, thank you, Board Member Commissioner Schmidt, and committee chair as well. To Dr. Jenkins, to our fellow board members, I want to thank you for this opportunity to present to you on behalf of the auxiliary services team. Jesse, if you would help me guide the slides, I would appreciate it. As always, we anchor everything in our core values and our goals. Goal number 1, every child is on track to graduate ready, college, career, and community. Goal 2, the district and every school in it is a place where children, staff, and family thrive. And goal number 3, African American children and youth excel in school. Next slide. The district's mission and vision: to achieve MMSD's graduate vision and strategic framework goals, we work collaboratively to ensure all students have access to high quality, equitable, inclusive instruction and services leading to deep learning and resulting in college, career, community readiness. Next slide. I want to take a moment to just highlight some of our auxiliary services team that you see present with me. Although this is a transportation overview, I want to take a moment to just highlight them. If you can see, the auxiliary services actually encompass several other departments, transportation being one. I'll take a moment here to highlight our assistant director of auxiliary services, Ken Thomas, who will be presenting with me today, as well as Vanessa, who will be presenting, and also in support, Svetlin Borisov is also online as well. And first of all, I want to thank John Bain. John is our outgoing director of auxiliary services, who just recently received another job in Colorado. So again, I want to thank those for helping us put this presentation together. I'll turn it over to Vanessa.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Vanessa Cruz y soy la coordinadora de transporte. Quiero saludar a la comunidad latina para que sepan que estoy aquí para apoyarlos en el área de transporte. My name is Vanessa Cruz and I'm the bilingual regular education coordinator. I do all the yellow bus routing. And with me, I have my colleague, Kara Hansen, and she will introduce what she does.
My name is Kara Hansen. I'm the special education transportation coordinator. I coordinate all transportation students with transportation in their IEP.
And we also have Amanda Nagel.
I am Amanda Nagel. I do the TEP transportation, so the transitional education program for our homeless and foster students under.
And so we're a relatively new team and we're just trying to take a good look at this to make it the best way we can for our students. So. Slide.
And I want to highlight before you go, Dr. Cheeks, I'm sorry, Chris Whalen right fast. Chris, if you want to explain to you and the reason why we have her here, Chris has been a mainstay in the transportation department for some time, but I want to acknowledge her presence here as well.
So my position is actually as lead buyer in the procurement department, but I have been with the auxiliary services department for over 7 years. So I have a lot of the history that goes behind our decisions. That have gone.
Dr. Jenkins.
Board members, I want to tell you, after 32 years in education, having been a superintendent now for a long time, I've never seen a team this diverse. This many women on the team of transportation, never seen it. To have Ms. Cruz speak at the meeting in Spanish, never happened in 32 years. I am so proud just looking at this team. I know they're sharp, they're very sharp. But I just want to acknowledge that in my 32 years, in my long time being a superintendent, that diverse and dominated by women. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and you really are a dream team. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And just to echo that point, as we continue with the presentation, it was very important for us to have a diverse team. And one of the things that we focused on and we've been laser focused on is quality service. And we recognized that we were not able or meeting the needs of our brown children here in the district. And so having a bilingual specialist able to talk to those families was critical to advancement, particularly in our area. But again, I want to thank you, Dr. Jenkins, for that acknowledgement.
Mr. Hodo, I'm just gonna have you pause for, we're just gonna take a quick, like, 2-minute break here, just to make sure that
Yeah.
we have all our board members back.
I didn't even realize.
Yeah, so if everybody would like to take a quick 2-minute break, let's make it quick. for the return of your presentation. Thank you.
All right, do we want to wait on Dr. Jenkins or keep proceeding?
Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Thank you, board member. Go, Smith. Continuing on, Jesse, thank you for forwarding to the next slide for me. Thank you. As we talk about, what are we here for today? Today, we'll go over a quick overview.
Hey, sorry, Jesse, we're still in the drive screen in the presentation. Yes, we're there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jesse. So today's overview, what we'll talk about, what are our areas of concerns? What are some key strategies in which we looked at in formulating the RFP? We'll talk about some historical state of the district. We'll also take a look at the current state of MMSD's transportation. And finally, we'll take a deep dive into the transportation RFP, the overview, the analysis, and what we kind of need from the board on today. Prior to going to the next slide, I do want to say that there is no vote needed today. This is for informational purposes so that the board can gather as much data to help us make an informed decision. We will be asking that the board come back on next month as we take a look at the timeline. We'll go over that shortly, but I did want to say that. Two other points before we move into the presentation. Because we have an active RFP out on the street now, we are in the final stages of making a selection. If a question arises that of which may compromise our BAFO negotiations, I'll quickly ask you all to pause for a second and we'll give you a response in a written format. BAFO is best and final offer for the final candidates. I want to make sure I have respect for the RFP process, that we don't have any formal discussions in the open public. All right, I'll transition over to Ken. Next slide.
Thank you. We just want to bring your attention to some of our key concerns around transportation that we've been seeing. One of the biggest things is the national driver shortage. That has driven a lot of things in the direction that we have gone in over the last couple of years. We've our way into the local market and we've seen numbers drop from roughly 80 drivers to 40, 44, 45 drivers that are available for MMSD routes now. Also, we see a need to integrate more technology into our transportation services. This encompasses GPS tracking for both parents and the district, parent tracking apps, things of that nature, better equipped communication systems for the district and our provider. And that leads us to enhancing customer service for all families, putting where their child is at the palm of their hands, as well as communicating any issues that the bus is having in real time. Next slide. Here we have a few of our national pupil transportation best practices. One of the things that we're seeing that a lot of districts are doing is they're implementing driver training and development programs, specifically around social and emotional wellness. With the loss of instructional time that a lot of kids have seen due to COVID, this is an important factor for a lot of transportation companies to look at. Also, and how to help students with disabilities cope to stressful situations on the bus. Number two, we see that technology technology and empowering parents is a must. So we want to put, like we said, parent tracking apps to go along with parents and real-time communication on bus delays. Put that at the palm of the parent. And three, a bus fleet that meets MMSD's needs. What is that? A diverse fleet of vehicles that includes up to 90 passenger vehicles, diverse shuttles, vans, and cars to support all of our student needs. We also want to support our district's renewable energy goals. So we are also looking to implement EV vehicles, and we're seeing that a lot of transportation providers are going this way. Next slide, I'll hand it over to Mr. Hodo.
All right, thank you, Ken. As we take a look at some of our key strategies in formulating the RFP, we thought it was very important that we take a look at our top three. When you look at engaged school and community and the value that rate of return or return on investment was very critical for us. As we formulated the RFP, we wanted to evaluate our current state, We also want to make sure that we research best practices, industry standards to get us to the 21st century. One of the things that was key for us is our commitment to strategic investments as we strive to enhance our transportational services, as well as reinforcing positive and productive relationships with families, staff, and our communities. As you see, our transportation department is diverse. It should be reflective of our students in our schools, as well as reflective of our community as well. Let's take a look at the historical data right fast. Next slide. Thank you. In 2019, from a just kind of level set for some of the board members who may be new, in 2019, a study was done. That sleep study was designed to put forth a transition plan. That transition plan was to take all middle school students off of Metro bus and have them to ride the yellow bus, or currently called Badger Bus now. That transitional plan, as well as sleep study, will make sure you have access to that data as well. In 2019 through 2020, we phased in the first approach, was the West Side schools. The schools who are currently on yellow bus now are Jefferson, Spring Harbor, Cherokee, Wright, Tokie, and Hamilton. The remaining middle schools in the districts were to come at a later date. We phased these in. In 2021, we asked the board to pause for a second because our current carrier did not have the capacity to take on the additional schools to take them over to yellow bus. And so we asked the district for a pause. Now, that was directly related to the pandemic and the driver shortage. We're coming back to the board now in 2023, asking the board to resume the transition plan that you originally started in converting all middle school students from Metro bus to Badger bus, or yellow bus, as part of the transition plan. And so let's take a look at next slide. What are we asking the board? Our recommendations to the superintendent, it's as follows. October 7th, we released these RFP. On November 18th, we had 6 submittals, vendors that submitted. On January 17th, we made our initial presentation to our committee chair. We're asking the board from January 17th through February 26th that you have multiple briefings to discuss or gather any questions that you may desire, that of which we can take back to our current vendors. February 1st, we're asking the SLT and the senior cabinet members to review. This will give them a month to ask any questions pertaining that we may have missed or anything that may influence in making a key decision for our next transportation vendor. This is a very critical ask, but we know it is absolutely important. February 27th, we asking the board to vote. In part, the reason why is it typically takes about 6 months in making major transitions of this caliber. And so by mid-August, our goal is to have a new transportation provider, whoever won the bid, based upon the recommendations to the superintendent. The 3 finalists are Badger Bus, First Student, and Go Right Transportation. We'll select one or a combination of both, depending on the recommendation to the superintendent. We'll transition to the next slide.
Okay, so this is just going to give you an overview of how many students we're transporting every day. We have 17,026 students that we are moving from their home to school every day. We have 8,327 that are assigned to yellow bus. 7,788 Metro bus passes are assigned. We have 388 special education students, again, with that IEP in their, or the transportation in their IEP that goes through Badger Bus, the white van service. And then we have 200 TEP students, the homeless students that Amanda transports. And that's also through our contracted carrier, and we have cabs that help to support that. And then there are 323 parochial students that we transport every day. Next slide. And so this is a little more in depth of the current state of services that we provide right now. So right now we are on that 3-tier system. Okay, so there's 3 levels of start times for schools, and that means all buses are doing 3 routes. We have 6 middle schools on the Madison Metro, which are the East Side schools, and we have the West Side schools on Yellow Bus. All high schools are on Metro.
And then we have the special education transportation provided by our contracted carrier. And again, the TEP transportation is by the contracted carrier and cab companies. Next slide.
Thank you. Here we want to bring your attention to the 2-tier versus the 3-tier system. Talk about the benefits and some of the drawbacks that we've seen in 3-tier. In a 2-tier, it reduces bus overcrowding that we've seen. It allows for more time to be built into the route so that students can get to school before breakfast is served and to get to their classes on time. It also allows for us to put more stops along the route, reducing walk distance for students from stop to stop. What we've seen in the 3-tier, this 3-tier system leaves drivers with little to no room for traffic or weather delays, puts buses at max capacity many times. It's also been causing parents to have to self-transport due to late buses, both inbound and outbound from school. It also required us to change our bell times. We've seen that it has been an interruption to the instructional process when buses are late to school. Adversely, we've also seen the effect in food and nutrition because on meal counts, because our students are not getting to school on time, they're missing their meals in the morning, and then those meals are going to waste, those ones that would have been allocated. Next slide. Now we've seen our current state of affairs, but let's look into the future. These are things that we consider are non-negotiable. A 2-tier routing system, going back to pre-pandemic bell times. All of our middle schools are one contracted carrier. All Reg Ed and SPED rides on our contracted carrier, student vehicle, real-time tracking, real-time customer service. And we've also, within the RFP process, we've also instituted a risk reward clause based on service. So in the event that our contracted carrier cannot meet our needs on a consistent basis, there will be liquidated damages applied. At this time, I'll turn the remainder over to Cedric Polo.
All right, thank you, Ken. And that will probably be more punitive damage. The risk reward clause allows us to have to put metrics in place to ensure that our buses are on time and our kids are getting to school on time. We have some cases where unfortunately cabs are running behind. They may pick up a student. It may be 30, 40 minutes, sometimes an hour late based on weather delay. So we think that this is very critical for us. We'll close there for a second and then we'll open up for questions. But prior to that, Nikki, I see you have questions coming through. There are 2 additional slides. Take a look at them at your leisure. If anybody needs a clarification on how the tier systems work, we can walk you through that if you need that as well. But if not, we'll open up any questions you may have.
Not a question, a comment, Chris, if I may.
Yes, board member Vanderbilt.
Earlier this year, because I helped advocate, I was asked and I had to get out, obviously due to the conflict of interest. 2 parents called me. Their disability transport dropped their children off at the wrong part of West High School and had them lost for an hour. They lost 2 students. One nonverbal, one with Down syndrome. That's unacceptable. 2, I've had individuals with disabilities be up to 3 hours late. I've had individuals with disabilities and parents call me that said, well, they told us if we wanted better service, we needed to move closer. Obviously, that is not an acceptable answer. I used to take Badger Metro Ride. This isn't just a issue that is a school issue. I used to take Metro Ride. In the process of switching from Laidlaw to Metro Ride, Laidlaw to Badger, who was running the Metro Ride program, I had multiple complaints. I was late to over a quarter of my classes. I had 2 drivers try to stalk me by parking outside my house for 3 hours at a time. And they often didn't show up, and when they did, if I was a minute late, they would take off and then not reschedule the ride. Plus, I had to have it scheduled within 24 hours of advance. If you have younger school children, how many kids are going and parents are able to tell you their exact schedule 24 hours in advance with no changes whatsoever? It's not doable. So it's for those reasons I think we need to look elsewhere from what we're doing.
Woman Vandermillen, thank you for your comments. I want to make sure I'm categorically clear. Our current provider does not meet the capacity and the service needs of our growing school district. And that is the reason why we're here to take a look at this RFP. The RFP have been 5 years plus 3 extension years. And by DPI laws and standards, we have to take it out to bid. We have taken your comments down and we'll ask for our current provider to provide some responses to them. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I hope it wasn't too off topic, but I just felt, especially the first one with losing people, just makes me nervous.
That's just small.
Right, other questions? Board Member Nichols, followed by Board Member Pearson.
Yes, thank you so much for the information. Just a couple of questions. In the RFP, it looks like before you do the notification of intent to award, whatever that final vendor is, the board approves first, correct? So based on the timeline that you showed tonight, when we vote in February, we're voting on kind of the final selected vendor, or are you bringing us a couple of your top vendors to choose from? Like, can you just talk through the process?
Sure.
Yeah.
We have a very rigorous process, including rating systems, scoring systems, metrics, pros, cons, et cetera. We'll divulge that information to the superintendent so he can have access to that and the board can make the best informed decision. Ultimately, what our recommendation is, we're gathering feedback at this point, and the feedback will lead to our final recommendation to the superintendent, who will make the recommendation to them. I believe that we have 2 paths that we should consider based upon the uniqueness of this particular RFP competition. The 3 finalists that we chose, we feel as if there's one finalist who has the capacity, full capacity, to take on 100%. We also have another option. Another option on the table is we also have one carrier who only bidded for 1 feeder system. That is an offset from the traditional norm, but it provides us 2 competing companies in our district. Our goal is to provide the best level of service to our kids. We put some non-negotiables in there that we are unwilling to waiver on, and whoever will meet those demands, we will make the recommendation to the superintendent, move forward with that company.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. The second thing I wanted to just clarify. So we currently have a tier 3 system, which means that elementary, middle, and high school have staggered start times. And those different start times allow the buses to loop one group of students, then pick up another group, and then the third group, right? No, that's not tier 3? Okay, so let's clarify then, I guess, my understanding of tier 3.
Jesse, can you pull up that last slide for a second? Thank you. But excellent question, Board Member Nichols, excellent question. I think it's the last slide on there. I'll kind of walk through it for you. No, I'll kind of walk through it for you just from informational purposes. So this is the actual bus route, but the 3-tier system really is harming us, we believe. But we were forced to do this. This was not pre-pandemic. This was post-pandemic, but what's driving it is not having enough drivers. So if you take a look at column A with Stevens Gold route, the bus picks up at 6:51. It starts at 6:51. The bus picks up 52 students. I'm going straight down. It makes 12 stops, 2 minutes per stop. They drop off those 52 kids at 7:15. Stevens start at 7:30. Stevens has no problems. We good with them, okay? But here's the problem. It has to take 37-minute trip over to Mirror. Mirror first picks up at 7:52. We have to get 92 students. We make 5 stops in picking them up, 3 minutes per stop. We drop them off at 8:05, and Mirror begins at 8:20. Mirror's in good condition. Our kids still have enough time to get in, get breakfast, get settled, et cetera. That bus now has 7 minutes to make it over to Jefferson. It starts at 8:12. It picks up 66 students, make 14 stops in 3 minutes. And its drop-off time is 8:55. Where we're pressured at is that third tier group of students are getting to school sometimes repeatedly late. Now, this is when all things is equal. Okay. Now factor in traffic delays, weather in Wisconsin, snow, et cetera. And so I think that we have to look at this very seriously just to make sure if we get out of the 3-tier system and one bus can focus on 2 routes, I think we win. Okay. Pre-pandemic, we had about 80, 85, 87 drivers. When we came out of the pandemic, we had about 43. We had to do that. The choice was either get them to school slightly late, or don't get them to school at all. And so that was not an option of not getting them to school at all. So that 3-tier system you can see is putting pressure, unjust pressure on the district. If you look at the 2-tier system, much more simpler, allow our kids to get to school, less pressure on the bus, better timing, they can eat, they can get settled in, less dysregulating on the bus. You got 92 kids potentially on the bus. Our bus capacity is 77 kids. So we literally have to stop that route and call in the second bus to come and get more kids. We can't overcapacity a bus. So those are some pressures that we're running into. Now, this isn't every kid rode the bus on that day, of course. But nevertheless, that will give you an insight. High school students are strictly on Metro bus alone, so they have passes to get to school. This would include high school.
Okay.
Metro bus, yeah.
One other nuance I'd like to just bring to your attention, in that 3-tier system, we have 50 minutes between bell times. In the 2-tier, we gain another 5 minutes in between bell times. That, 5 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but if you look at the average stop time per stop, 2 to 3 minutes, that gives a driver 2 to 4 minutes wiggle room in the event that there's any issues that a child may be running a little late and they wait a little bit. It gives us room and just to wait for those or get through those situations and still make it to school on time.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So what is the cost for the 2-tier system?
That will be something that we should put in writing that will compromise our negotiation for next final offer this time. But we have that information for you, and then we'll present it to the superintendent and looking at the financial side. But on the legal advisement, I can't say that.
That's fine. That's fine. I appreciate that. So thank you for the explanation, because I thought I had remembered that we had moved with a connection between school start times and busing routes, which I thought was why I mentioned a staggered. I remembered something about elementary and middle and the routes all being looped together. I don't know if that's exactly what I just saw on the screen, but thank you for the correction. I do want to go back though to start times, because you mentioned in your presentation that you want to take middle schools back. Is it just middle schools, or would it be all school bell times would change?
No, so the presentation is designed for us to continue on with the original plan that the board had voted for. That is to take middle school students off Metro transportation, to go to yellow bus transportation.
Right, and part of the reason, as I recall, because I worked in MMSD at that time, part of the reason I recall that there was a commitment to that was more because of the research around the adolescent brain.
Yeah. Correct.
It wasn't about the buses. It was really about, what do we know about tweens and teens and their brain? And when middle schools were starting way too early, we had done a lot of research around how really students aren't fully awake, they need more sleep. And so the board had been presented with quite a bit of information about, wouldn't it be amazing to actually have a later start time for our middle school students, so that they actually were engaging and learning when they arrived at school. And then once the board was kind of like, this makes sense, we love that idea, then it was like the bus routes were kind of tied to that. But I felt like, the way I remember it now, and Cindy Green may have a different recollection, but I thought it started with wanting to change the middle school experience for students first, and then the busing kind of followed. And then we were not able to implement any of that. That was the way I remembered it.
Can I speak to that? So correct, yes, Michelle. It started with the case study with Dr. Hurdig and whatnot. And the research that was done on the sleep with the middle schoolers. And then we implemented all of that, had all of those schedules, the transportation in place and whatnot, and it was great. And then the pandemic hit.
Yes.
And then that's when
Coming out of the pandemic, now you don't have enough drivers, you can't make it happen. And so, right, so like, it's kind of like we're turning back to, because I think there was like a 3-year phase in on the middle school times changing, and then how that would like change the elementaries. I remember something about some schools were flipping, becoming early start, some were gonna become late start. Anyway, so you're saying kind of getting back to where we were. I mean, as you said in your presentation, but like that whole part.
Right, but it's my understanding, we're not talking about changing any start times though. We're only looking at transportation and getting the students to school.
Oh, so we're not returning then to the original thinking about the adolescent brain and middle school students.
Studying what we found.
I think we.
Not returning to that part.
Earlier start times for middle school.
Wait, what was that?
We're not intending to put middle schools back at the earlier start time.
Mhm.
Okay,
Put middle schools at the later start time, but they have to be roughly about 50 minutes outside of elementary. So elementary's first in the tier, middle school's next.
okay, got it. Thank you for clarifying. Okay,
Board Member Pierce. Oh,
Thank you.
did that answer all your questions?
yes.
Board Member Pearson.
Yeah, I know that I had a bunch of questions, so I will not ask all of them right now. Send an email. My first question is just about, I know that the historical reflections and how we're trying to maneuver based off of what the board set out in, previously, where we want to actually move. The question is just about, based off of our conversation today, just about like some of our mandatory things and how we want to adapt. Do you believe that some of these spaces that we are putting here in the future or next steps could possibly change and maybe change in a different way than what we kind of are envisioning right now? And let me know if that doesn't make sense. I'm thinking of just like adaptations and how we like we're saying, for instance, we want to move into all middle schools being on the yellow bus service, right? And that then changes where we're at right now. But does that necessarily have to be that way? Or can we possibly find some ways to adapt? And that's just an example of like what we said that we previously wanted to move forward with, and some of the goals set out for previous conversations. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I certainly get it. 2 points. Yeah, no, I get it. 2 points. If by change, if one measure of change, you mean is there a financial implication? Absolutely. We'll make sure that we have a capture of that. I think our value systems are gonna have to be looked upon, and the decision-making is rooted in our value systems. Some people can make the case that one side of the town is getting to school on a yellow bus, the other side has to catch Metro bus. Some people can make the case that Metro bus give you a little bit more freedom to maneuver around. But our primary responsibility is to get our kids from home to school first. That's always been our leading thought process. Okay? Everything else after that is extra. But based upon what we envision, we're trying to find equity throughout the entire district. And I think equity is to ensure that all our middle schools are moving at the same time, to get into school on time, and they have similar bell times. We don't want to disrupt any education for any student. When a Metro bus is late, I can make the case that his or her education has been interrupted and disrupted. It could be leading to more inequality, so to speak, from an educational side.
Yeah, I appreciate you speaking to that. And I know that I mentioned just about the making sure that our babies are getting to school. And how important that is in making sure the equity is there and that they're, being served best. And I think as long as we continue to put our babies at the forefront of all of this, making sure they can get to point A to point B, I think is really, so I appreciate you responding to that.
And one other comment that I think also here in your question, there's a safety aspect. Some of our sixth graders are riding the bus, and some of our kids have maybe missed some social emotional connections over the last couple of years. So we have kids transitioning into middle school. Are they ready to be on the bus and maneuver around, go to transfer points? And so I look at, want to make sure that every child is safe. We have a path to getting them to school, and on time is our primary responsibility, I think. And so we look very hard into that. And if we will make our recommendations to the superintendent based upon our research. This entire team has been embedded over a year doing the research to get us to this point here. And again, I want to thank the entire team for helping us, but certainly open to discussion. We'll take your feedback.
Thank you. I guess my next question is just still in the line of adapting to the transportation right now in the city of Madison as we are moving into like the rapid transit busing and how that might affect what we are doing and how we are getting served by Madison Metro. I don't know if you can.
Yes, I'm aware, and Ken, you may be aware as well, but you can be prepared to make them. We sat on the a lot of the discussions for some of the rapid transit and the moves and the elimination of certain drop-off points and pickup points. We believe that may hurt one side of town, to be honest with you. And so we're working very closely with Metro to make sure that our Dodger routes that are getting our high school students to school are systematic and they're efficient, put it that way. Some of the outlying routes may not be such because they have to run a business. If they're not picking up people at certain routes, they eliminate them, to be honest with you. The belief is that they can get to certain places faster by eliminating the dead routes, so to speak. But we are laser focused on that. I think that is a whole nother topic conversation when it comes toward Metro and our high school students. And that's something I'm certainly more than willing to take up with the superintendent. Let him know.
Awesome, thank you. And then I just have one more that I'll just ask in this space. It's more so relating to our children who live in Fitchburg and some of the surrounding areas that Metro doesn't necessarily. And some of our children live in areas where they can go to a lot of different like schools. But yet the transportation isn't always there. How are we making sure that children are being served and they are actually getting to school?
I can speak to that. Right now, the schools that you're talking about are mainly are on Madison Metro mainline route. So we help to provide bus passes, and they do take mainline routes. One of the things that we've worked out with Metro, and this is historical, is that prior to every year, we send out route sheets to all the schools to give to the family so they know exactly where along even that mainline route where their child will be picked up and dropped off at. So that's the oversight that we provide parents and schools with regards to those. For instance, Badger Rock is one of those schools. So that's what we're doing right now. Looking into the future, I think that's something we'll take a look at and how we properly address that and service those families.
And the reason why I asked that question is because as Madison is growing, I mean, there's a lot of housing that is going up that's mostly geared towards not family folks, so more young people, young professionals, people without children. However, the surrounding areas around Madison are focusing on more family-oriented development. That makes sense. One, they have the space to the population growing. And so that's why I mentioned places like Fitchburg and how we're kind of having that relationship with them, because Madison, a lot of buses don't go. A lot of buses don't go closer to Oregon. We have a large population of like you mentioned, Badger Rock, you have a large population of Black and brown students who live in that area that might not have access to transportation. And so just ensuring that we're having those relationships with some of the surrounding areas and ensuring that we're able to serve those kids and not have to rely on necessarily the families that might have to transfer for their kids. So that's the reason why I asked that question, because the population is growing around us. Resources from our city are always overlapping.
Thank you.
Board member Sim, followed by board member Vanderbilt.
So we started talking about safety, and that's what my questions are around. I've been part of a neighborhood meeting recently that was concerning safety. And those families were told that the buses are sort of a zone where the district isn't responsible for the students. And so I'm interested in getting a little bit of clarification around that and finding out as well if what kinds of questions you've asked to the 3 companies that have bid around any kind of oversight or support that they could be providing our students while they're on the bus.
Great question. The safety issue, there's in the RFP, there's a response, and each bidder has put forth what they would do in regards towards safety, technology, attendance, etc. I will not answer that question in this setting, but I'll get you a written response from the vendor. With respect to your question around safety, there's 2 types of buses, that of which you're probably looking at. The Metro bus safety, because of the Badger bus or Yellow bus safety. 2 different scenarios, okay? Scenario 1, Metro bus is a civil matter. Whenever our kids are on the Metro bus, any regular citizen, it falls under that particular company. Our internal processes fall under the Board of Education policies. Typically, if there's some dysregulation on the bus itself, we have applicable standards by which we apply, starting with our principals and notifying them, and working with the student social specialists to try to offset that. We've even gotten to the point now where our coordinators and directors actually ride in the bus to observe as well. A part of the respondents in the RFP is what will they do to ensure that our kids are safe while riding the bus? That is a question that of which we measure a score and a rating, that we have that as a pro and con. But I wouldn't be able to tell you how they responded, but I have it in writing for you.
Do we currently have buses for any age level that are not the sped buses, sped transportation, but the other transportation that has regular aids? Or is it all bus staff that are on buses?
Can you rephrase the question?
Do we have district staff regularly on any of our buses?
It's not a practice of the district to have district staff on the buses. Typically, our contract, in our contract, that is a service that is provided by our contracted carrier. They provide their own aids and they hire and get their own aids on the bus.
So,
however, before you go, I would say that we have had some demonstrations where there appeared to be an uptick in any type of dysregulation on the bus. Some principals has assigned individuals at that school, parent liaisons, etc., to step in to support, and we've seen those problems go away quickly by just having additional support. This thing in terms of 50 kids on the bus, 60 on the bus, and 1 bus driver, his sole responsibility is to get from A to B. And so everything behind them is secondary in truth. And so we're trying to find ways to work with our bus providers. They have submitted information in the RFP that provides a wraparound support while on the bus. And I think that's part of the rating scale.
Okay, I'm gonna be really interested to see what kind of support each offering.
Yeah.
Thank you. Board Member Vandermeulen, I have a couple questions.
Yes, I just have one. I know earlier this year, we ran into an equity issue where part of the city had Metro and was not paying for if they lost a bus card, and part of the city paying if they did lose a bus card. And my question is this: will it cost to keep us all to provide these bus passes for everyone? And how do we deal with that cost?
At this time, I don't have a solid number on what the cost would be. We can get that to you in writing. We haven't allocated budget for that, but to support the entire district, that would be something we'd have to research and get back to you on.
I appreciate that.
No problem.
I guess following up on that question, it seems to me that the RFP that you released, you're looking to move away from providing that number, like the half and half for middle school. We're moving all our middle schools onto the yellow bus. And so that we wouldn't have the issue of some having bus passes that needed to be replaced if lost. Everybody would be on the yellow buses.
That's correct.
Okay, I want to say the priority of getting our buses back to a 2-tier schedule is huge. Just from the feedback that I have gotten from the community over the last couple of years. Not only from the transportation issues that happen if there's an issue with weather or anything like that, but just also from the early time it has kicked those kids getting on the bus at 6:50. I mean, even looking at that 2-tier system where you have kids getting on the bus after 7, I think that's a huge adjustment. And then the middle schools having to start so late, what I have heard feedback on is that we're running into problems at the end of the day where the kids are just done. And that last hour of school has been really difficult. So any way you go, we're going to have some scenarios here, but I'm really excited about the possibility of getting back to a 2-tier system where it seems like we have these more regular start times. My question around it, because it does seem like we're going to have to adjust the bell schedules to do that. And at first, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking we were moving for some reason to a model where you would have all the elementary schools starting at the same time and all the middle schools, but we can't do that because we have 44 schools, 32 of them are elementary and 12 of them are middle schools. So how do you see it playing out? And maybe you don't have this information yet. Maybe you would have to find the provider first and then work this out. But I'm assuming all the middle schools would start at the same time and then there would be some early and some later start elementary schools. Is that how it would work? If you have like 22 routes for 44 schools?
Yeah, I think looking at the data for the pre-pandemic, it was that because you have those combo schools where you have a middle school and the elementary school, and there's a need to not have them start exactly at the same time. So I think there would have to be some flexibility in the start times, like especially on the elementary school side. But we're working with the leadership to iron those things out.
Okay, and then
I would also chime in. We work with our associate superintendents as well. Dr. Hicks, Cindy Green, elementary, middle, and highs on how we can make that happen. And that's part of the vetting process with the SLTT. What are some of the pros and cons? But I think Cindy has given us some really good start times that we think we can actually accommodate. And we put that as one of the questions in the RFP.
Okay, and I appreciate it, again, coming at it from an instructional lens. And I know one of the difficulties, having watched that process earlier before the pandemic, is the cost was a factor in how we were able to do this. And so I think coming forward to us, understanding if there is a cost differential and what that's going to mean for us going forward is important. But I do appreciate lifting the instructional piece of this and how we make sure that we're best getting our students to school at a time where they can best learn. I think that's a priority. The last thing I'll ask is then if we are going to have to make adjustments, if we're going to vote in February and make adjustments to Bell schedules, when should families know that for the upcoming school year? Because I do think that is important for families in the community to understand if changes like that are coming.
Sure. I think once that we meet with our senior leadership, and we can look at what works best instructionally and logistically, you can get those bell times out. Typically, our routes aren't done until August, but I think getting that to families sooner or later, once we have we've ended this process, we have secured a carrier, we work through what works best for our schools and our carrier. We can get that out.
And not even just getting the routes fixed, but instructionally for the staff, knowing when they're going to start and knowing like if they have their own transporting kids to different places and getting kids to daycare, like just for our staff, they need to know that as soon as possible, like March, April, so that they can do planning for the upcoming school year.
I think looking at the spring would be a good time.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mid-spring.
Please not on a Friday afternoon.
Dr. Jenkins.
I just want to say, and I just want to caution us about overpromising, because been through this many times. I just want to say we're gonna go back because we have to get it first approved, decide upon the vendor. I would just caution us just a little bit to give ourselves accurate time because it takes time. I know that. Right? How we're gonna get our students to which schools, the staff needs to know. Parents need to know, everyone, but I don't want to overpromise right here. I've been through it many times and we just don't get it that fast. And I've been in larger districts and smaller districts. It is a beast to get this done, even though you have the dream team. I know that, right? I just want to caution us and let us get back with you that timeline answer. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
I appreciate that, Dr. Jenkins, and fully recognize that. I just hope we can keep those pieces in mind as we move forward. So thank you.
That's priority number one for us, Dr. Jenkins. That's priority number one for us.
Okay, Board Member Nichols has one final question, she tells me.
This one. I noticed in your RFP that you were asking the vendors to submit several different plans that would, you know, kind of show you all the different ways that they would accommodate all of our students. Can you say a little bit more about our TEP transportation? I know that taxi cabs have been a big part of the TEP transportation, and I know there's been some just some hardship, I think, around like consistency with the cabs, or at least that's what I experienced when we worked in MMSD. Are we hoping that this vendor will have like its own van service or like something that would actually pick up our TEP students and accommodate them? Or I don't know what you all are thinking about.
Start with Ken and then we'll go to.
Okay.
I think that is the hope. I think we need to make sure that we have that the vendor that we are using has the same core values as we do and is looking to, you know, maximize everything that we need when we need it. And I think that because we don't have, our cab companies are not contracted vendors, they're not held to the same standard. So I think we want to get one standard for our care, for all our means of transportation. And I think to do that, we need to get this on our TEP students, our TEP transportation on a contracted carrier. I think there's a ramp up period that we've talked about. This is going to take time to do so. I think that the cab companies have been as good as they can to us. I think they are facing the same uphill battle with regards to drivers as every other carrier. It's not a vehicle shortage, it's just putting a qualified person in those vehicles to drive. So, I mean, I don't want to fault them, but you know, for that, but they're experiencing the same things and being more of another public entity that takes on, you know, common carrier rides to stay competitive and to make money. They're doing as much as they can. Sometimes they're over promising, but I think if we can get that marginalized group of kids on a stable form of transportation, we definitely need to focus that. That has to be a spotlight in the area. And it has been.
Board Member Nichols, I'll add, and we'll have Amanda to chime in, but I think it's critical for us. This is one of the sections in the RFP that we are really weighed heavy on quality service. The important piece here is, as most of us know, a lot of our TEP students already are marginalized kids. And they are, it's a lot of logistics in picking them up from day 1 to day 2 to day 3 to day 4. It may be 5, 6, 7 different locations we're taking them, but every day takes a different routing.
Right.
All of that logistics is what Amanda focuses on. And so she can share with you some of the pain points as well as some things that we've done just to get our kids in the midst of a pandemic where they gotta go. And we've been upward to a 300 to 400 in some cases when it comes to our TEP students as well. So Amanda, I'll let you speak.
So to add on to what they said, I mean, yes, we would want the bulk of the rides to be on our contractor, but we will always need the supplemental.
Okay.
For those instances of the last minute change, so now they're no longer on that route, so they need a ride home still, so we would have to utilize a cab. And then if they are able to be rerouted on that route or different route, then we go back to our contractor.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, I am gonna wrap us up here. If it were not even more challenging, I'm gonna connect one more dot with our priorities in this district, and that is sustainability. So I know that I met with the Green Club at West High School, and they were asking about sustainable transportation and electrifying buses and vehicles and all kinds of things in our transportation fleet. So is that part of the RFP? And is that part of like considering going forward if there's a carrier that has potential to move in that direction?
As part of the RFP, it was a rating section in RFP for electrical vehicles or sustainability, this entire section. And so with all due respect, we will allow you to see that once we get into this.
Just wanted to highlight that. So thank you very much. So thank you so much for your presentation. Really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to hearing more about the options going forward.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, that is the last item on our agenda for this meeting. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Nikki.
Seconded by Maya.
Seconded by Maya. Joanna, if you are still with us, if you're set for your advisory vote?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And for everybody else, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We are officially adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.
Can we reschedule the close? Because my brain is not going to be able to do that.